What's going on, everyone? We've got a big video for you all today. 92 leaders in the format right now in Premiere. We're going to be ranking them all on a tier list as we like to do for these sets. I figured I'd get this in early alongside some of the other videos that I've mentioned because I wouldn't be surprised if this list has to be redone post a suspension like we did back in set 5, or set 4 rather. And in set 5, actually, we had multiple different bans. So we're diving in here, 92 leaders. Not as many as the most we've ever done for a video, but still up there in terms of, wow. Next set, we're going to be capping out on leaders before we rotate out again. So we're just going to dive right into a huge thank you to my patrons over on Patreon, and a special thank you to Hawk's Nest Gaming. Huge supporters of the channel. Guys, if you're in Atlanta, check out the store. Check out the links down below. Check out the screen. All sorts of stuff. Absolutely amazing. With these leaders here, we've got so much to talk about. I just want to immediately start diving into the tiers first off. As if you've watched any of my tier list videos, these are basically going to be the same descriptions of the tiers. There's going to be timestamps down below, and I'm going to try to put the leaders up on screen as we talk about them, as I normally do. At least the front side images, putting both can be sometimes distracting. So for those of you that maybe on mobile have a chance to read them. S tier, these are going to be leaders that are absolutely incredibly powerful, must deal with, and even potentially have some versatility to them. I'm starting to rate versatility a little bit less so, especially as the leader pool expands, because realistically, there's not going to be many lists out there that have multiple different aspect decks to them. But S tier, these are going to be the decks to beat, and specifically the leaders that are manning these decks to beat, right? If you do not have a leader that can combat, or a construction of that leader that can combat some of these S tier leaders, you are basically omitted from the A tier, right? You can't even be an A tier list if you're not well built to deal with the S tier lists. So S tier, absolutely must play leaders, must know how to beat leaders, and must know how to play against leaders if you're going to have any sort of competitive streak. A tier, these are going to be leaders that still have some very competitive decks that absolutely can take down a sector qualifier, planetary qualifier, maybe even the Galactic Championship itself, but aren't necessarily the boogeymen of the format. You're still going to have some sort of competitive strategy that's going to be very strong. And in some cases, your A tier lists have strategies that completely counter certain S tier lists, or not necessarily counter specifically because it's hard to do so. That's why they're S tier, but at least have a favorable win rate up against some of the S tier lists, which in of itself can be a viable way to win a competitive tournament because those are going to be the majority of the players out there. B tier lists, these are going to be or leaders are going to be your store showdown leaders. You're going to bring in a strategy that's either very, very just memeing and has a good game plan, but really folds to certain lists, or just may in general be a little bit weaker, but you want to run a different leader. These can vary in strength. Some of these are borderline actually competitive lists, and some of these are really truly, yeah, I'm just bringing this, maybe beating you up in your store showdown and then moving on. C tier, this is starting to get to the point where I'm like, why would you play this leader? You know, is there something really cool about this? You know, is there something like very, very niche, but super inconsistent that can work out? Is there something that, you know, really just is done better by the leaders above it, which is generally the case? A perfect example of this, you know, can be something similar to like the upgrade leaders. Okay, this is an upgrade leader. This is an upgrade leader. Is this upgrade leader just doing something better than this other one? Potentially. We've got D tier. These are the leaders that honestly, you are just kind of trolling if you're trying to build around. Like, yes, don't get me wrong. Every leader on this list can win games. But there are just some that, like, when you're trying to build towards, it truly, truly just feels bad playing with those leaders. Trust me, okay? And maybe not even trust me. Just go play them yourself. And you'll kind of feel, if you play enough games, you're going to feel the pain of playing some of these leaders. And those are going to be your D tier ones. With all of that said, we've got a lot of leaders, as you can see right here. So let's just waste no time and dive right into it. Starting us off, we've got the Vigilance category. As I said earlier, I'm going to try to put the leader images on the screen for you all, especially for you mobile enjoyers. And, you know, if you just want to listen and fall asleep and then wake up and I'm still here, that works too. I love doing that. We got Luke here up first. This is one of the new leaders, actually. So cool to see a set 8 leader show up very, very initially. This one, when a friendly unit attacks ends, you could exhaust the leader to heal 1 damage from that unit that attacked. in Vigilance Heroism, and then the flip side is a flip for 7 resources, so pretty late in the game. You get a 6/7, which is honestly a little bit higher power than we normally see at this stage of the game, so that is a strength, and has an ability when a friendly unit's attack ends, you heal 2 damage from that unit or from your base. Now, this one's been pretty interesting. I think a lot of people, including myself, bought into the idea. I was borderline initially, and then I played with Luke, and I was like, yeah, this is actually pretty strong, and then I started to consider, okay, well, the healing can be very powerful. Maybe we can make this truly, truly powerful in of itself. And honestly, after the initial set of, set 8, before the set was actually released, he started just to fall off. Like, we really weren't seeing a whole lot of Lukes out there at all. And really, he's kind of ended up in that tier where he has some competitive options, certainly, but he really, truly has not been showing up at all in tournaments a whole lot. We do have a few people playing them. Like, we did see a lot of people trying them out at the Galactic Championship, and after that, it really just hasn't done a whole lot. It wasn't terrible, mind you. We were hoping like it would be like a meta-defining leader, which is why I'm kind of like so down on it. But I actually think he will end up in like low A tier, maybe even high B tier. I'm going to start with the high B tier because I do think there's actually a lot of strong lists out there, despite the domination by one in particular. Moving on, though, we've got Callus, Agent Callus. I had very high hopes for this guy, honestly. We've got a Vigilance Villainy leader that basically says you can pay 1 action to play a card from our hand, ignoring its aspect penalties. You get some bonuses on the flip side for playing Heroism cards. It's a 5 to deploy 3/6, so kind of weak stat line. Really, all this allows you to do is play cards out of aspect for 1 cheaper. That's the whole game plan, the whole gimmick of this guy. You know what doesn't really work out is trying to do that when your opponents are just straight up playing cards 2 additional costs out of aspect, and it's still good enough. And guess what color those cards are in? Vigilance Villainy. So honestly, the fun part about Callus here, if maybe some of those cards were not Vigilance Villainy and you could play them for 1 cheaper than some other people can, maybe there's some game to Callus, to be honest. But the way the current meta sits, it's pretty mediocre. There are some cool things you can splash and do some fun things, especially with like the Spectre units like Kanan and Zeb. These are very, very solid multicolor cards, multi-aspect cards that you can get a discount on. But even if you're getting a discount on them, the strength does get weaker, right? So like the whole point of them is that they're so early in the game and they have a powerful effect that it's kind of crazy that they actually cost at that point. But in the meantime, he's kind of just a C tier mediocre option. I would go pretty low on this guy right now. I think he's much stronger in Eternal, where you could go ahead and play like double aspect cards like Cunning and Vigilance and Aggression and Command. If you guys have not seen that video, that was actually a pretty fun video that we did with Callus. So that's where I think his strength lies. Alrighty, we got Jabba next up. This one, oh, poor Jabba. This one's a Vigilance Villainy, as with Callus. He's got this action to pay 1, and you can deal some damage to an opposing unit based on a friendly unit's damaged number. So if friendly unit is damaged, you deal 1. If they have 3 or more damage on it, then you deal 2. He flips for 5 as a 2/8 and basically says if one of your units gets hits and lives, you get to go ahead and deal that much damage back to an opposing unit. That's actually pretty powerful. Honestly, the front side action portion of him, it's not bad, but it's definitely not like amazing. It's his flip side that really you want to leverage. Now, last set I actually had him pretty high. I couldn't remember if it was B or A. It's definitely fallen off since then. The game has gotten much more longer paced, and you're not really dealing with a lot like solid mid-range value decks. You're dealing with a little bit bigger than that. And because you're going a little bit bigger than that, the strength of Jabba gets a lot weaker because you're not having to like, okay, I need to get through this Sentinel and then I'm going to have my unit live and I'm going to kill it with a weaker unit, with Ambush, with Jabba, or maybe I just play a Sentinel on my own and then you have to hit the Sentinel and then I hit you for a bunch of damage. It's not really like that. Jabba Yellow is tending to be the stronger one these days, but Jabba Lake Country is still open. But I would probably put him a big difference between Luke and Jabba, I'll say, but probably in the B tier. It's kind of deceiving because right now we only have 3 leaders on the list, but Jabba would be like almost C tier right now, lower on the B tier, and Luke would almost be A tier. So a big difference between the two, even though these are right next to each other on the list so far. We've seen Jabba show up a little bit actually, but his performance has been atrocious. Like we're talking like sub 25% win rate or something like that, from what I've seen. Minimal amount of games played, sure, probably one person playing it, but that just goes to show you that the strength of Jabba. Next up, we've got Palpatine. This one, another Vigilance villainy, Secrets of Power leader. This one, honestly, pretty interesting in terms of what his potential is at the current moment. We have seen him improve slowly but surely, mainly because the format has favored these more slower paced decks. And realistically, when you're looking at Palpatine, his engine is, I get to draw some plot cards. I get to have this big turn. I have a really, really well statted leader on a 7 to deploy 6/8, right? I get to play a bunch of plot cards, get to cheat a little bit on mana cost or resource cost. And it's in Vigilance Villainy, which I mentioned before is by far the strongest aspect combination right now. You get to play Chimera and Previsla in your list. So yeah, these are all good things for Palpatine. I don't necessarily think the leader itself is like incredibly powerful, but I do think his whole gimmick fits well with what the meta is right now. So I definitely think this is like a higher B tier list. I don't think it's quite better than Luke, but you know, Previsla Chimera is pretty good, so you could definitely put some points towards that. I do think Palpatine benefits from those. Even if it can't draw those cards specifically, it can at least draw more cards to maybe filter towards those two that you're looking for. Baylan is up next, and honestly, this guy's performed pretty well in the minor sample size that we've had so far. I just think that he's in a good aspect combination, 5 to deploy 4/6. Even if the action isn't super relevant where he can give +2/+2 to stuff, I do think that overall he's well positioned as a leader in his aspects, in his deploy cost, etc. But that said, I mean, his action of being able to give +2/+2 or power up a unit when it's the only unit in its arena on the flip side on attack actually does really well up against certain units. Like, for example, if your opponent goes turn 2 Marok and you've got like a random 2-powered unit on turn 1, you could potentially deal 4 damage to that thing, whereas otherwise you're dealing 2. Now, it does cost a resource, so it really depends on the situation. Not saying that's necessarily like an amazing play to make or anything like that, but there is a little bit more game to this action than otherwise it would seem. Of course, it's amazing in Limited, but not nearly as good in Premier. He definitely is kind of middle of the pack. His aspects and deploy costs are carrying him a little bit. I'm actually going to put Luke in A tier just to make a little differential here for the time being. But I do think he's like low A tier, high B tier. So we'll figure out where. But yeah, Baylan's going to fit right in between Jabba and Palp. I think Palpatine's on the higher end of B tier. Jabba's on the low end. And then Baylan's kind of somewhere in the middle in terms of effectiveness so far. You could maybe have an argument between these two. I do think that, you know, Jabba has dynamics to where Baylan is lacking, where you do have that extra value to be generated from your units. But Baylan is just overall solid. You don't need anything to set up, or you don't need a matchup to really make Baylan amazing, or just even decent. So that points towards Baylan. Next up, we've got Jyn Erso. Now, this one's been an interesting one because I was really not super high on Jyn. I think I put her somewhere around C tier when she was first initially released, which was definitely a little bit short-sighted, where she was more like on the lower end of A tier with Aggressive Negotiations being released. Ever since then, though, she's just gotten weaker and weaker and weaker. I think she actually ends up in like the lower end of B tier at this point. We've seen Jyn approach certain tournaments, like 1 or 2 games here, 1 or 2 leaders there. And yes, you're still doing the Ray, Aggressive Negotiations game plan, but I will say there's just so many decks that can easily deal with a bunch of units. You have so many big Sentinels that the Aggressive Negotiations one-shotting you game plan is much harder to do when your turn 2 is a Marok that just stonewalls every single card you play. And then also you can't even get through it and kill off your own units to draw cards to get to Aggressive Negotiations. And like Imperial Armored Commando is a tough one. You need answers for all these cards in the meta and do the Aggressive Negotiations thing and also have your units die so that you can actually draw cards to make Jyn worth it. There's a lot of setup costs. It just ends up being very, very weak. That said, it is still a powerful list. Like, there's still some power to it. If you're drawing into Rays and getting rid of shield tokens or killing off units, and you are drawing a bunch of cards and Aggressive Negotiations, it can still be a +8, +9, +10 damage hit, and that can close out a game for you very easily. Velsartha is the next one up, and this one, you know, was pretty exciting. It was pretty exciting when Lando was the king, because Lando was going to do his thing no matter what, and you were just going to have a lot of hate up against credit tokens naturally in your deck. Since then, I think she's gotten a lot worse, because there's a lot of decks around now that are looking to play the mid-range game plan, and they'll just use that credit token immediately. Like, yes, you might be able to play something and defeat the credit token, or make them useless with like Galen or whatever you've got, but the extra like point of experience, power or toughness with the experience token really doesn't give you enough value to make it so that the rest of your deck constructed around credit tokens or preventing your opponent from doing it and having a 6 to play leader 4/7 is going to be worthwhile for you, because extra power and toughness still doesn't matter up against Sentinels usually. Like, Americ's going to survive and they're going to hit you anyways, or Imperial Armored Commando, or whatever these other cards that people are playing that block you are going to do the same thing anyways. So the extra experience token doesn't nearly matter as much. I think this is much more valuable in like a unit to unit combat based strategy, but this, I think, is a lot weaker now. A lot weaker. You just cannot risk just passing your opponent a credit token, especially when your opponents are oftentimes, even though they are a little bit more big and not necessarily controlling, but just playing on that higher amount of resources, your opponents will have answers along the way as well, which is extremely scary. If your opponent has an answer, then not only did you not get any value from your experience token, but you also buffed up your opponent, which is the worst case scenario of all time. So, you know, definitely on the lower end of B tier as well. Gonna have to keep her there. And we'll move on to the next one. Sabine is next. And you know what? I was excited for Sabine, as this one, we haven't had Sabine in the meta for a little bit. And, well, now we've got a Vigilance Heroism version, giving us an action to give 2 advantage tokens to a unit and opponents. Gives advantage tokens to a unit they control. And this is a must do. Like, your opponent can't just choose not to. If they do put the advantage tokens, which means you cannot use this action on an empty board, you're going to play a unit and it's going to get shielded. Now, keep in mind that if your opponent or if your unit already has shielded, it's not going to get 2 shields. And yes, the shielded goes away at the end of the phase, but you're still going to get that shield token when they come into play. So you're going to basically get a shield token on a unit. That's basically how this is worded. Now, advantage to an opponent's unit, that honestly doesn't matter a whole lot. Realistically, like, yes, sure, in some situations, it's going to do a little bit extra damage to you, and it's going to be a little bit sad. And some matchups, it's going to be a little bit weaker. But the shielded is actually pretty nice. The problem is that if your shield token is really weak against certain matchups, then giving them extra power just to beat you down with it is very, very weak. So this is a case of, yes, the advantage tokens don't matter a whole lot in certain matchups, but in those matchups where they don't matter, the shield token also feels weak. And then in the matchups where the advantage tokens do matter, the shield token feels very weak because they're just beating you down. So it's kind of an awkward spot for Sabine. She's also a 5 to deploy 3/5, which is a very, very weak stat line. And overall, I just have not found her to be incredibly amazing. Nothing like terrible. I think she ends up somewhere in the grouping down here. She actually has some okay performances, better than Vel and Jin so far. But I think overall the deck situates itself and the leader situates itself somewhere in the low B tier category. You know, some of these might actually drop down into the C tier category very soon. But I actually do think that some of these actually have some games. So we'll keep it. We'll have a big B tier so far, and we'll see how this goes going forward. Got ourselves another new leader here in Grand Admiral Thrawn. This one, action to attack with a unit. It gains Restore 2 for the attack if you have the same number of units as the defending player. So you play a unit, your opponent plays a unit, you get to use the action, boom, you get Restore 2. Kind of nice. The Restore 2 is kind of whatever. There are a lot of situations where it's not going to come into play. Occasionally, I would say usually in the games, I get like maybe 2 or 4 HP out of this. It is typical. If the game goes well, obviously it's more. If the game goes poorly, it might be 0. So just keep that in mind. I think the real strength of him is the, well, late to deploy 8 resources to deploy. You get a 5/8 out of it. And then you also says on attack, if you control more units than the defending player, you can defeat a non-leader unit. That is really, really powerful. Now, typically there are ways to leverage this, that's like Chancellor Palpatine and things like that. So I oftentimes see him in green, and it's a really big payoff. But You have to get there, and you still have to make that condition met. Otherwise, he's really, really weak. So, well, I shouldn't say really, really weak. He is just not going to deploy, right? You're kind of playing a controlling deck, and then you're relying on your Thrawn to win. But Vigilance Villainy is really well supported for that. And then the meta itself tends to go into the later stages of the game these days. Not like super late, but definitely like 6 resource deploys, 7 resource deploys, and things like that aren't too abnormal. So you're not really too worried about like completely getting overrun in a lot of games. And therefore, Thrawn can survive and can leverage that. Not to mention, you do have cards like Pre-Vizsla, which allow you to set up for this. You've got cards like Chancellor Palpatine, which allow you to set up for Thrawn. So definitely some power there, and definitely can take advantage of that and do some work. I do think he's a solid value villainy vigilance leader. So I'm going to put him in the low end of A tier. I actually do think he's worse than Luke. So we'll put him in A tier for now, but I think these guys are going to sit in the low end of A tier and not move down to B tier. Aura Singh. This one has been an interesting one. So been in the meta for a little bit now. Has this action to defeat a non-leader unit with one or less remaining HP, I should say. And then 7 to deploy, 3/7, kill something on its flip, Vigilance Villainy. I mean, this is just straight up an A tier. Like I said, the game is going longer these days. You want to have a little bit more value within your deck. And there's a lot of like random 1 toughness stuff that you can just kill. Like Han Solo's a super popular card people are playing these days. And that just dies. Just like straight up. Leppy Lookout just dies. Lats, if they don't put an experience token on it, just dies. Right? All of these things are very, very good for Aura. I've seen different variations, Aura Red, Aura Green. All of them are pretty solid. So there's a little bit of versatility with it. But overall, it's just a solid controlling list. Like this truly is a controlling list. Oftentimes you are getting late into the game. It's not necessarily like a high value mid range where I'm deploying a bunch of units and just kind of blocking your path and doing your thing. This one, while you can have units in it and you can leverage that, like Lats, for example, with Aura is great because you can set up for a 1 HP so Aura can defeat it. Still, you just end up getting later on in the game, and then you kind of slowly win the game with Annihilators, Devastators, not Devastators these days, but Annihilators, Trask Walkers, and things like that. So A tier for Aura. Got ourselves a Ventress next up. Ventress, interesting leader. Has this action to deal 1 to a friendly unit, and if you do, you can deal 1 to an enemy unit in the same arena. So you kind of have to play the same arena that your opponent's playing into. Otherwise, this leader doesn't really do a whole lot. But you have this really obnoxious pilot deploy, which is the first of its type that we've talked about here for this video. But 6 to deploy pilots, you can pilot onto a vehicle unit, and you can get a pretty nice stat boost with giving that unit grit. So I think that's probably the strongest portion of Asajj, where because your unit has grit, you can kind of deal 1 damage to itself and then deal 1 damage to your opponent's unit, or even just deal 1 damage to itself, honestly, at the same, just to get +1 power. +3, +4 is hard to deal with, and there's not really a whole lot to deal with piloted up units these days. Like Retaliation is one, I guess Hyperspace Disaster and things like that, like big wrath effects can. It still is a little bit tricky to deal with this type of stuff. That said, she's not performed well. Asajj Red is the most common one that I've seen. I've seen a little bit of Asajj Yellow and things like that. Again, none of them have been particularly amazing. It oftentimes just feels like you're really, really awkward in terms of your play patterns because you want to deploy units to the same arena that your opponent's deploying units into. And if you're not, then you're not doing anything with your leader. And then if you do rely on the deploy from Asajj, there's a lot of upgrade hate now. So they can just deal with that that way. And while there isn't a whole lot of ways for some decks to deal with the pilots, usually those decks are trying to win the game beforehand. And then the decks that can deal with pilots oftentimes are just going super late, and they'll have damage-based effects or big wrath effects to deal with it. I've not been super impressed with Asajj. I think she's actually C tier, which makes me want to put Vel maybe in the C tier as well. Yeah, I think these two are fine in the C tier. We'll change up the list as we go, like I said, but I do not think Asajj has been very good. We've seen her a couple times, and she's like, again, similar to like Jabba, like sub 25% win rate. But even worse than Jabba. I think Jabba was like sub 30. This one's like sub 25, sub 20 or something like that. It's bad. Another Vigilance villainy leader here. We got Kylo. This one actually kind of dominated the meta back in set 5 with Legends of the Force. But we have this action to discard a card from our hand if it's an upgrade. If it's an upgrade, you get to draw a card. So you get to filter your deck quite a bit. Honestly, this just sets up for his deploy 7 resource deploy that basically states all the upgrades in your discard pile you can just play on him immediately as you deploy him. We know how powerful action cheating is. This could be a very powerful effect. He's a 5/5 Sentinel at base. So you basically just power him up, put a Craving Power on it, knock out a unit, and then you just get this big fat Sentinel that closes out the game, right? That's the idea. Realistically, like I said, with Thrawn and Palpatine, this guy it's just solid. It's just solid. There's nothing too bad about him or anything like that. We've seen a little bit more decks showcased compared to Palpatine and a few of the other lists, and they've actually performed decently well. So I do think this leader is just decently positioned. You know, you're playing basically a Vigilance villainy command list with solid cards, and then you've got a very, very powerful leader deploy, and that's oftentimes just good enough to win the game, right? You can play the very powerful Vigilance villainy cards like Chimera and Pre Vizsla in this deck, and you can also kind of afford to play some other cool cards like Anakin and set up very nicely for it. So you have some game in other directions as well. Overall, just a solid list. Nothing too difficult to complain about. Before, this was like the de facto control list, and it was really, really obnoxious. These days, it's just kind of one of the good options, and it's solid. Nothing too crazy, though. Not as good as some of the other lists above it, or as much value as some of the other lists above it, but can do its thing. We've got the next leader here in Satine Cries. I'm going to be honest, guys. Our first D-tierer. So she's got this action to heal up 2 damage from a unit. If you do, you deal that much damage to your base. The first thought is, well, doesn't this counter Cad Bane? Sure, I guess Cad Bane's ability to just deal 1 damage to a base. But honestly, that still doesn't really matter. Even in the cases where Satine... Okay, maybe I'll put it in C tier for the hopeful few. Like, okay, I was debating... maybe a C tier, because there has been a couple players that showed up to tournaments of this and performed like not atrociously. So we'll put it in C tier. But yes, there is like some game to like Cad Bane healing up and things like that. Granted, that's not like the entirety of the meta, but it is a good portion, spoiler alert. So that is nice, but you just don't get anything on the leader flip. Like a 0/8 restore 4 leader is just not good. Like, you are just going to lose that game 90% of the time because you have no way to actually get any power on board and control the board. Like, yes, you can go with Darksaber and like put a bunch of upgrades on Satine. That's not really necessarily a winning game plan. There's so much damage-based effects now that can actually just target down your leader, or just big sentinels. And if your opponent has a big sentinel, let's say, or just a random sentinel, you don't even need a whole lot. There's the 0/8. Just hit the 0/8. And if you kill Satine off, their deck probably is just a bad like command villainy heroism, or a command vigilance heroism deck, which is oftentimes the case. So yeah, gonna give Satine a C tier. I'll move it out of the D tier range, but you know, she might get pushed into there. Okay, she might. Next up, we've got Leia. Now this one actually has performed better than I thought. She's got this action to pay 1, and you can disclose a aspect with the exception of villainy. And if you do, you can give an experience token to a unit that doesn't have the same aspect as you disclosed. So the idea here is like you play Lats and Leppy Lookout, and then you disclose heroism, right? Then you can give an experience token to Leppy Lookout or Lats. That's the whole game plan. Pretty just kind of utilizing your resources when you have the ability to get a little bit of extra value on your units. This is honestly just a solid game plan. This truly is a mid-range list, like what I would consider to be mid-range. I've seen some Leia's trying to splash some villainy cards. It has worked out decently well. Honestly, I mean, this list is very strong. I would put it better than Luke. I do think her ability overall is just more proactive than Luke's. She has an early deploy, 6 resources versus 7 resources, and can really take control of a game. So those are all good things for Leia. She actually has shown up quite a bit for set 8 so far. And if you let's say you just compare the 2 leaders that are right next to each other, Luke has shown up almost twice as much as Leia, but Leia's win rate's actually far higher than Luke's. So A little bit of balancing there. I think if you were to interchange some of these, you can argue one or the other. But Leia's actually been very, very strong. So pretty good shout out to Leia. And overall, honestly, not a bad list to take in. We've got Talzin next up, probably the quintessential Force list that we still have in the format. If you're going to play a deck that's utilizing the Force, you're probably playing Talzin. She probably situates herself just behind Aura Singh overall. Just a very, very strong, not necessarily controlling list, because usually you're playing like Talzin Yellow or even Talzin Red, and you're actually just playing units that are proactive, right? Your units that utilize the Force and utilize her action do deploy to the board, like Tal's Assassin, Tyrannus, Karis on turn 1, for example. The Stranger is a card that people oftentimes play. These are all very, very powerful, ground-based, interactive units that do close out the game. He struggles a little bit against space decks, typically. From what we've seen, all the cards that you're trying to play to work with the Force are Force units. Therefore, you're playing a lot of ground units, and then the payoffs are also ground units, which means that Force or space is a little bit hard, which is why we're not quite at the highest ends of A tier and why Aura Singh's a little bit stronger than her. But she does have a very solid game plan, and overall is just a solid leader to work with. Nothing too crazy. Didn't really get a whole lot from the new set, but still does have a few tools to deal with a lot of the things going on right now. And it's Vigilance Villainy, which means you can play Pre-Vizsla, you can play Chimera, you can play No Glory, which is already a big plus. Next up, we've got Thrawn. Now, this one's been an interesting one because a lot of people, including myself, thought he was going to be a very, very powerful list. And he is. He's very, very good. We've got a lot of cool things with Thrawn. And, of course, playing like the Legacy run in Thrawn Force is just good, right? It's just good. You know what the not necessarily most surprising, but the thing that really, really messes you up if you're playing Thrawn? Having opponents be playing No Glory. It's like the worst experience. Your whole deck is built around when defeated triggers, and oftentimes you cannot win without them. But if your opponent not only kills your unit, but also uses your when defeated triggers for themselves, you're probably just getting like 2 or 3 for 1. And that's oftentimes what happens. And if you look here, what is, not that we are complete with the list, we're only starting with Vigilance, but what are we seeing a lot of the times, even in the air tier list? Thrawn, Talzin, Aura Singh, all these guys are playing No Glory. I've seen No Glory splashed in Luke's, in Leia's, in other lists, right? No Glory alongside like the Pre-Vizsla and Chimeras are in other lists outside of their aspect. That is a very, very good card against Thrawn. And even just that is enough to push him out of the S tier, like easily. But then also, he just doesn't, like his game plan, his super powerful strengths are truly really good up against like non-value decks. Like, yes, if your opponent is going to play like big units, you can technically use Legacy Run and do your thing. But normally, that's super strong against the unit-based strategies. And we're just not seeing a crazy amount of those. And oftentimes, the decks that are trying to play and a little bit more aggressively have like a combo finish in a sense. So, not that he's bad by any means, but I would probably put him... this was a tricky one because I probably put him like somewhere around there. He has shown up more than anyone else in the A tier, and then also performed weaker than everyone else in the A tier, which is kind of funny. I actually do think that's just a symptom of him being played a lot. So I'll still keep him in the A tier. And he is a list that people do need to think about when you're building around certain decks, because you will find yourself up against Thrawn quite a bit. So I do think he's in the A tier a little bit, but on the lower side of it, honestly. So I'm going to keep him there. Lama Su, next up. This is a first of our upgrade-themed leaders that we have in the grouping. This one has the one to basically deal 1 damage to a unit, and you can pay 1 cheaper for an upgrade if you put it on a friendly non-vehicle unit. So you get a little bit cheaper in terms of upgrades, but you have to deal damage to the unit. Oftentimes that's a bonus. You basically build your whole game plan around this. Got a 6 to deploy, 3/7, and that can retrieve upgrades from the discard pile. There are cool upgrades that are in the format. Like Darksaber is a massive buff to Lama Su. Lama Su was borderline D tier, and like can cheese out some really, really meme games by just going full on all upgrades, and your opponent may have an answer for it, may not. But you know what's really bad against that? Damage-based effects. And that is one of the most common ways to kill off units in some of the top tier decks. And unfortunately, Darksaber doesn't do anything to counter that. There's also a lot of upgrade hate. There's a lot of Sentinels, which usually upgrades are bad against because you're putting all your eggs in one basket, which you then have to fight through those Sentinels. He's not bad, but he's a C tier. He's a higher C tier. Maybe I'll put him at the top of C tier because I think Darksaber made him actually a viable option. Before, if you put all your upgrades on an early unit, you're just losing that early unit to like a Beguile or like a random removal. Now, if you go turn 2, you can play Darksaber on something. And if you do, like, let's say you go Lobot into Darksaber, that suddenly becomes a 5/5 leader unit, right? Like, that's pretty incredible. And now your opponent has to find some way to get through the Sentinel and kill off your Lobot or deal with the Darksaber. And that's going to be just hard to do. You can follow that up with, like, Mastery and a various amount of other upgrades, Nimble Prowess, and things like that. And it's going to be tricky. It's going to be tricky. But like I said, Sentinels are really bad for it. So you need to find like Ascension Cable in your deck, which is usually something you're splashing for because you're playing Darksaber as your main aspect or Command as your main aspect. So yeah, a little bit tricky. Not the worst upgrade leader, but definitely a little bit finicky. Next up, we got Ahsoka. And honestly, this is my first D tier list. Okay. Our D tier leader. Actually use the Force to give something Sentinel, 6 to deploy 5/6, decently aggressive, but you know, just you playing a deck that's trying to set up for the Force and then your payoff is to just give something Sentinel is bad. It is bad. It's too many actions, oftentimes not relevant by the point you need the Sentinel. And then also you have to play all these other cards to set up for it. And then you have better cards to use the Force on, which means you're probably not going to be able to use the Force on the Sentinel when it's relevant. And then you're also just playing Vigilance Heroism and trying to build towards this strategy, which usually Force-based heroism strategies that are revolving around something like this are pretty weak. There's usually only a couple of like heroism Force-based strategies that are even relevant right now. I think that if you're really trying to go for Ahsoka and trying to utilize the Force with this, you're really better off just not. Unfortunately, I would just say don't do it. And that's why I'm going to put her in D tier. Next up, we've got Kanan. And this might be a shocker to you all. Okay, I'm going to put Satine in D tier. I'm putting Kanan in D tier, though. I'm putting Kanan in D tier. I've got to. Okay, you know what? C tier for Satine. I'm just going to do it because I know people are triggered already. They're like, but the Cad Bane value. And I'm going to talk about Cad Bane a little bit here. I know, spoilers, but Cad Bane's kind of everywhere. You know what the worst feeling in the world is? Trying to set up some sort of shield token that just gets blanked by your opponent's action. And you paid 1 resource for yours, and they didn't. That is miserable. Everything Kanan does, Cad Bane just completely destroys. And it is bad. And honestly, even just going with this game plan of trying to play creatures or specters is already fringe and weak. I would have put him in like the C tier or like low B tier in the past. I think he's just gotten weaker and weaker and weaker, especially with the format going bigger and bigger and bigger. You don't want to be doing these like weird things, putting shield tokens on things and like cutting your resources down to get this mediocre value. It can do a few things. I just think that if you're going with this game plan right now, you're actually just making your win rate worse because of the decks you're oftentimes seeing, and you're going to find yourself in a bad spot. And that's typically what D tier is. You may have some sort of niche effect that's strong, but if the niche effect that's strong is weak now up against the decks that are being played, you suddenly end up in D tier. And I think that's actually where Kanan lives right now. Ooh, I feel bad for our friend Kanan. On that note, we've got Lando, which is going to be in the same spot. Everything that I just talked about, like the everything that I just mentioned about Kanan also applies to Lando with the shield tokens. He's not D tier. Oh, man, maybe he's D tier. I think his baseline Sentinel and his overall game plan, because you don't have to actually utilize a whole action, is a little bit better. So maybe I'll push him out of the D tier category. But like I said, everything that Kanan does, or everything that is a problem with Lando or Kanan is also a problem with Lando in a lot of senses. The bonus to him is that you're not playing creatures or specters specifically to get your value. You can just play an overall good deck or a good structure of a deck at least. And then you get this weird payoff. You have the pilot component, which actually is beneficial in my opinion compared to Kanan, because you do get this big potential sentinel to block space game plans. So you know what? Those things are enough to push him out of the D tier and above Kanan here. So C tier. All right, we got to talk about Rose. I mentioned earlier Satine's not in D tier because of the heal. And I think Rose also has that same component where she's got this heal to blank some effects out there. Now, I don't think she's necessarily incredible or anything like that, but a 5 deploy 4 sticks is not bad. And one of the best things with Rose is playing ambushing vehicles, because then you can immediately get the heal and you get like kind of double value, right? You get to kill their unit, you heal it up, which means it's going to just like kill another thing and probably be able to heal up again, which is really, really strong. There's a lot of space decks right now. Vader, Luke, Boba, all good. Cad Bane's pinging you. I think she actually stacks up pretty decently up against some of the better decks in the format. So I'm actually pretty impressed with her. All that to say, it's not like she's A tier or S tier. Oh my gosh, someone screenshot that really quick. Go to Reddit and post this right now. Rose Tico was the best leader in the format. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, no, I'm just, she's like a B tier, like a mid B tier. That's what I would put her. Not necessarily like incredible. I'm hyping her up because in the past she has been in D tier, right? She has been, and it truly was bad. But there's been a lot of Cunning Sentinel or ambushing space units, right? Like Blue Ace, for example, is a really great card in her deck. And then you also have a bunch of decks that actually fold to that game plan that you might be running. That said, because you have to play this specific game plan, there are some decks that like basically don't care about what you just did, and therefore just kind of trounce you as a result. So, that's like a hallmark of a mid B tier list. It's something I'd bring to a store showdown and dominate someone with, and they'd be like, oh my gosh, this deck is broken. And then they'd be like, okay, well, let me see if I can counter it. And you really don't need to, because it's not like Rose is broken or anything like that. So B tier. Now we weasel our way over to Command here with Grand Admiral Sloan starting us off. I think with the early success with some of the planetary qualifiers, people were trying out Sloan. Actually, not even planetary, early tournaments from set 8. People were trying out Sloan. I actually had some pretty good or pretty good experiences with Sloan myself. So I did try a little bit of her more. And, she's good. There are some cool things with her. Getting the ability to choose, ground or space units all gain Sentinel Overwhelm. Really, the effective part about her is a 5 to deploy 4/5 that gives all your other units Overwhelm and Sentinel, not your opponents, which can really let you build a fortress of solitude of some sort. But she does end up dying a lot because there are ways to get past Sentinel, damage-based effects that just kill her, especially against, well, we've already talked enough about him, but I don't think he's bad, or she's bad by any means. I would put her solidly in like the B tier. Solidly in like a solid B tier position. Nothing too strong, nothing too weak. She's been played quite a bit, but her performance has not really been all that great. So I think B tier is totally reasonable. Next up, we got Boba Fett. Now, this one is interesting. Friendly bounty hunters is what it cares about. Killing things, getting credit tokens, ramping up that way. I'll still say it. I mean, we just don't have bounty hunters, really. I mean, Command Villainy, we want to have bounty hunters at 3/6 with Raid 1, so you kind of got something going there with the leader deploy. But we just don't have the bounty hunter concentration that you really need for us to be super happy. Now, you have gotten a couple of them from new sets. Maybe just one. Fennec. Fennec's really the only one. But if you're going to go that direction, you're out of Vigilance, which means you're out of like Lats, for example, or Bosk, which are some of the better ones. Then you've got like the Command Aggression game plan that like puts you in Dengar and High Singer. I think Boba Fett you just don't have enough bounty hunters to make it work. And I think he just ends up in C tier because of that. Like, if there were more bounty hunters and you could just kill a unit to get a credit token and then just play like a normal aggro deck and all your cards are bounty hunters and they're all working with what you want to do, you'd probably just be like a high B tier. The problem is that if you want to go the bounty hunter route, you oftentimes are taking concessions because the bounty hunters aren't necessarily all amazing. And then on top of that, you are too divided and all the cards you do want to play are not bounty hunters, which makes Boba Fett not work. So just a little bit of awkwardness overall with the options that you have. So I think he goes into C tier for the current moment. All right, we got Leia next up. And this is the other Leia, or another Leia, I should say. Not your big Vigilance heroism Leia with the aspect reveal, but rather a a card that probably a lot of you have not even seen before, which is the Intro Battle to Hoth Starter Leader. She has an action to pay 1, you heal 1 damage from a friendly unit. 5 to deploy 3/7 with heal 1 damage from another friendly unit on attack and deal 1 damage, and 1 damage from another friendly unit. So you heal 1 from 2 basically friendly units. You can heal from herself and then 1 damage from another friendly unit. We talked about how healing can be good, but those ones are free sources of healing. This is 1 resource. And then you get a 3/7 that all she does is more healing? I don't think she's very good. You're like never gonna want to be paying 1 resource to heal. The strength of the 0 cost healing is that it can stall actions. It can still be used after you play your best cards, and you're still end up in a meta with quite a lot of damage rolling around. This one, you don't get to do those 2 things, right? Because you have to plan for this 1 resource, which makes it extremely awkward. And then the payoff, well, what is it? You get not a bad statted leader, but only thing that it's offering is more healing. Yeah, not exactly good enough to warrant being played. It's not even 2 healing, which is also another thing, because if your opponent ever gets above that 1 damage, well, now you're only able to heal 1 of it, whereas Satine and Rose heal 2, which is extremely relevant for certain cards. So yeah, D tier for our Intro to Battle Hoth Leia. Next up we got Mothma, and this is one that I actually recently made a video on. I actually really enjoy this leader. You get to play all of your various different officials in 1 deck, and you get to play Unity of Purpose and then kill them with Unity of Purpose. It's a niche strategy. It's not exactly particularly amazing or anything like that. It's got some game to it. It is kind of obnoxious to have to kill off all your opponent's units when they have 1 extra toughness, which is what Mon Mothma does. On 5 to deploy 3/7, you get +0/+1 for all your officials. And there are a lot of officials that you might be surprised about. And then you get to just play all the good officials because you ignore all aspect penalties on non-villainy officials. So you just get to do it all. And you get to do it with Unity of Purpose. I think she's a C tier. Like a higher end of the C tier, because you do have a really, really incredible game plan of like play official, Unity of Purpose, or Crucible, or like other effects that just power up all your units, and you can win games like that for sure. It's just inconsistent, and if your opponents have like a good amount of Sentinels or have a way to actually proactively deal with all your units, then you're basically doing nothing, like literally nothing. So just something to kind of keep in mind. Next up, we've got other Ahsoka. So next to a D tier over here, Ahsoka, where does this Ahsoka end up? So one of the new ones, we've got Command Heroism. Action, choose a unit with less power than a friendly unit. It gets +2/+0 for this phase. Very, very powerful action. You get to go ahead and set up some really, really strong attacks. Oftentimes in the early game, even though you're using an action, it's not like your opponent can disrupt the game mechanic of this. You're either just killing off a unit or you're just dealing a lot of damage. +2 damage every single turn is really, really tough to deal with. And then the strongest part about her, she's 6 to deploy, 5/6, so really aggressive stat line for 6 to deploy. And then she has support and has the same effective ability on the front side as the flip side. The idea behind this is you get to play plot cards, allowing you to power up all your units to immediately attack with a very, very souped up unit, and then power up your Ahsoka leader to then attack again with 7 power instead of 5. And this all works because of support, plot, and the fact that Ahsoka is a leader. So because all your other cards just to get to immediately get the effect of whatever units you're playing, oftentimes Naboo Royal Starfighter and Jar Jar, you're going to get plus essentially 2 power onto your unit with the Naboo Royal Starship from the support mechanic from Ahsoka. Then you're also going to be able to get an additional 4 power on your Ahsoka, potentially 6 with Jar Jar, depending on how you're actually going to be able to shape that up. And that means that you're oftentimes attacking for like 15, 16 in a single 2 swings with Ahsoka deploy. And that is just enough action cheating to make it really powerful. And then because Ahsoka is a leader, you're probably going to be able to attack with her afterwards. If this was a regular unit afterwards, it's going to be a lot difficult to set up a big attack, but Ahsoka does not have that problem. She is going to be the first S tier of the list. The first S tier of the list. Yes, she has just a mass amount of games played with a very, very strong win rate, an incredible conversion rate, actually, overall. Despite being, I think it was only like 12% of the meta, her conversion rate to the top 64 was like 26%, which is pretty crazy. So really, really strong results overall from her. And just a deck that you really just have to have an answer for, whether it's a big sentinel or whether it truly is literally killing every unit that they have so they cannot utilize the Ahsoka deploy. It's shocking that because she has this early action to power up some units, you take 4, 8, maybe like 11 damage in the early game, you now are within lethal striking distance of like an Ahsoka deploy almost, which is scary. So that's the strength of her, is that in one action, you are now almost facing lethal. That's tough to deal with. She ends up in S tier. Moff Gideon is the next one on our list here. And this one, weird ability, but we've got an action. If a friendly Imperial unit was defeated this phase, you get to go ahead and play a unit from your hand costing 1 less. So basically get a little cheapening effect for Imperial units that may have died for your future units. Mind you that you don't need to play Imperial units with this. You just have to have a friendly Imperial unit to die for you to get the effect. Then we have a deploy, 7 deploy, 5, 8, that has basically all the keywords of all Imperial units that you previously had. So, you know, ambush, grit, hidden, overwhelm, saboteur, sentinel, all that stuff. If they're in the discard pile, then you get to go ahead and have that on Moff Gideon itself, which can be strong. The problem is that there's not enough Imperial units to support this. So there are quite a few Imperial units, but a lot of them are just not in the correct aspect that you want, right? There's just too many spread across too many different aspects. And a lot of cases, the Imperial units that do actually have keywords are just weak. Like, you don't want to be playing Remnant Interceptor or Forest Patroller in your deck. Moff Gideon is a good one. Like, the Sentinel version of Moff Gideon is a good one. You've got cards like Ninth Sister, I suppose, that's Imperial and has Overwhelm, or, you know, there's a few good ones, but you need to get later on in the game for that to happen, and then they need to die, and then you need to utilize Moff Gideon with them. It's just kind of difficult to set up. This one's definitely like a C tier. Pretty relatively weak later, not super strong. All right, we got Bo-Katan next up. I'm going to be honest, guys. I might be the biggest hater of Bo-Katan. And it's not even because Bo-Katan herself is like incredibly weak. It's because they've just shafted all the Mandalorians from the set. And there's not enough to support her. And then they put this Mandalorian token-based set out with Bo-Katan as like the perfect option to set it up. And you're just tragically sad every single time. She is a 10 deploy leader that gets cheaper based on how many Mando units you have on the board. So let's say you have 6 resources and 4 Mando units, you can deploy her. What I've experienced in this format is I am deploying her on 6 or 7 resources for a 4/7 that creates more Mando tokens and attempts to pump up other Mando tokens. You know what's really bad against as having Mando tokens? Pre-Vizsla and Chimera and all these other cards that just kill your units and then just heal up or give them units. The whole game plan of Bo-Katan just gets absolutely shafted by all the best decks in the format. I think trying to go for Mandalorians and make her work, because it's not just like, oh, I can play Bo-Katan, and then if I happen to make her work, great, I'm still going to have a good deck. It's, I need to shove all these Mandalorians in my deck. Otherwise, I will not be able to deploy my leader, and my leader doesn't do anything unless I have Mandalorians. And then the Mandalorians I am forced to play are bad. They're just bad cards. They're just not good. Like, if you had a lot more units like Casca, which is by far the best Mandalorian in the set, well, I guess I can't say that because Pre-Vizsla is existing. But in Bo-Katan specifically, the best Mandalorian is Casca, in my opinion, because it creates 2 Mandos, a Sentinel, and also is perfectly on rate. You just have to play bad ones. If there was more like Casca, then Bo-Katan could be truly, truly powerful, like maybe in an A tier, because it is strong. I think at the current iteration of it, even cards like Paz Vizsla, which I'm excited to play normally, are just terrible up against, you know, No Glory. And then Mandalorian, which is normally a good Mandalorian, well, that's like the best one with Casca. It's like you're super focused in on 4 drops. She's got to end up in C tier for me. I don't think she's quite D tier, but I do think that you're really hindering your deck if you're putting Mandalorians in it that are bad. And so the payoff of her doesn't make up for that oftentimes. And you oftentimes can't even deploy her early. Like, my goal is, if I can deploy her in 5 resources, this is like, the leader is doing her thing. 6 resources, and I'm like, okay, that's solid, but not like amazing. And even in the situations where I can deploy her for 6 resources, it is not often. Okay, I need 3 Mandos on the board to do that. You're just not going to be able to do that in a lot of games. She's going to go in C tier. Our next leader in command villainy is Director Krennic. And honestly, guys, I've got to slot this guy all the way up to to S tier, not C tier. I was debating. I was like, do I put this guy in S tier? And truly, yes, I do. I think this guy is really, truly worthy of it. If you look at the amount he was played, which was about like 120 decks across some of the tournaments, the Galactic Championships and things like that, and you look, and actually it was even further than that, all the planetary qualifiers and things like that. If you look at the win rate, he actually has a higher win rate, spoiler, than Cad Bane. He has like the highest win rate across the biggest decks that are played, like the popular decks, like top 20 or so. That's incredible. So he has a really, really good performance, not as popular. His conversion rate is absolutely disgusting. Of the decks that I've seen, like, absolutely highest, besides actually converting to truly wins, which is a consideration there. So I can't truly put him over like Ahsoka, for example. Well, maybe I should, because Ahsoka also hasn't converted. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to put him above Ahsoka. I just think that this guy's just better. I just think he's just better. Like, the amount of performance that this list has had, and Director Krennic specifically has had, is incredible. You have all the Vigilance villainy payoffs that you can ramp into, right? You've got some extremely powerful ability to leverage your leader, 7 to deploy that kills something when it comes in. You've got the ramp synergies that other decks can't really play, like Expendable Mercenary is not really a playable card in other decks. You can play a bunch of random cards that kind of filter themselves, like Ant Droid, that you can use to ramp. And then again, you just have those big payoffs that you're really, really looking forward to. This guy has been performing incredibly well. Incredibly well. I think that he's just de facto an S tier. Next up, we got Morgan Elspeth. Now, I actually do think she's gotten stronger over the course of time. I just don't think she's a very popular option. I think she slots in perfectly at like the higher end of C tier here. She really works well with all the shielded units, and we've gotten more and more shielded units as we went along. But realistically, nowadays, you can literally curve shielded unit into shielded unit into shielded unit, which shielded allows you to set up Morgan Elspeth's action. And then, of course, because you're playing all shielded units, you can then utilize her action for getting 1 cheaper resource on something. That said, they're all shielded units, and in a format with a few cards that deal damage, those shields go away, which means that they don't truly have as great of effectiveness as you would hope for with the units that you are playing. But I do think she has a reasonably okay game plan, and it actually performs decently well. So, gonna put her in C tier. Next up, I've got Leia. This one is the Leia from, oh my gosh, I forget what set she's from, but this is the one that has all the multi-aspect ones. I think she's a lawless time. Yeah, she is a lawless time. So Leia here, command heroism, pay 2. You can give a unit +1/+1 for each different aspect it has. This can be strong, like power and some damage if you are like on the flip turn and trying to win the game. She's a 5 to flip 2/2, but she gets 1 extra experience token to a unit for each different aspect among units you control, which means guaranteed she's 2 + 2 experience tokens. She's a 4/4 at minimum because she's command heroism herself. Oftentimes, though, if you're playing Leia, she's at least 3 experience, so she's kind of like a 5 to deploy 5/5, which is actually not bad. But you can also put the experience tokens on something else, which is dynamic, and that is interesting. I've played her a lot in like space strategies with Admiral Akbar, which I do think is pretty strong because you can play like villainy cards in your list and maybe get like +4 or +4/+4 or +5/+5, which is crazy. I have seen that not too uncommonly. There are technically 6 aspects in the game, which means you can have +6/+6, right? Vigilance command, aggression, cunning, heroism, villainy. The villainy component is difficult, plus all the different colors. So, but I do think it has some legs and can do some fun things. I do think she ends up kind of in the lower end of C tier. There is a lot of disruption to be had with Leia now, so I don't think she's quite as strong as maybe just like, utilizing her from last set or something like that. No one was really utilizing her. Okay, she's just a C tier. Sorry, Leia. Next up, we got Hera. This is the one that while you control 2 more units, you can ignore aspect penalties on heroism units you play. This was kind of exciting because when she was released, there was a lot of Spectre synergy and a lot of cards that really cared about having other aspects on the board to get you some sort of good effect. Sabine, Kanan, Chopper, Zeb, all those are very strong. Kanan and Zeb being the cream of the crop when it comes to those cards. Realistically, though, having 2 units on the board is not necessarily the easiest feat. And then your Kanans and Zeb have just gotten weaker by nature of what cards people are playing these days. And oftentimes you're not able to close out the game before your opponents can get that massive value train running. And then the 3/6 to deploy with, Restore 1 is just not exactly where you want to be, unfortunately. And even if you do have Zeb and Kanan, which bounce and kill things, like, people are getting value from just having their leaders on the board. So it's not truly as disruptive as it used to be. I think she's not terrible, but probably ends up... Literally, the only thing she does is allow you to play Kanan and Zeb in the same deck for free if you have free earlier units, which isn't always guaranteed. So I don't actually think she's that strong. I think I'll have to put her probably like C tier, unfortunately. Talk about a fall from grace from the previous set. We got Yularen here, which previously I think he was situated somewhere around like the S or A tier. I think now he's probably somewhere smack dab, right? Kind of in the middle of B tier. We'll situate it like this, I think. This guy has actually done okay. Not like the worst. Actually, no. I'm going to do it like this. Yularen's definitely better than Sloan. Yeah. Yularen previously was just like a good aggro leader. Like you can play a bunch of units, you put down stuff, you get to attack in with multiple units at a time. These are just good things to do. And nowadays, there's a lot of HP to chew through. There is a lot of damaging things that can just block your path. And it's really good against Yularen? Sentinels. Obviously, removal is not great because you can immediately attack with everything. Sentinels, on the other hand, if your opponent just plays a Sentinel, these brick walls all the attacks, assuming you can't just immediately kill it with one attack, right? And there's a lot of Sentinels out right now, so I don't think Yularen has performed all that well, partially because of that and partially because the meta has shifted. But I'm going to put him at the top of B tier because while he is not like S tier like he was previously, he still has some game to him and does some pretty strong things with cheating actions with the attacking with 2 units at a time with his action. All right, guys, I have never been a fan of this leader, and I'm going to put him in D tier because I'm still not a fan of him. Bail Organa, weird ability of being able to like return resources to your hand to like take specific cards when a friendly unit was defeated, but it costs an actual resource. His deploy is to discard 2 cards. You get a 3/3 out of it. And if you play stuff from your resource pile or whatnot, so you can go ahead and heal. It's just all bad. You get a 3/3. You can deploy him on I don't know, like 4 by discarding cards and then do it over and over again. This is the last place you want to be. You don't want to be discarding your whole hand and trying to get value out of your plot cards and things like that with Bail in this format. It's just too slow, too weak. The value that you're generating is just weaker than all the other decks. Trying to play Bail makes your whole life worse in this format. I am so sorry for you Bail enjoyers. Next up, we got Dryden. Now, this one's been pretty interesting. We've got different variations, but I think the force-based version is probably the strongest version of Dryden. Basically ambushing out things where otherwise those units would not be able to attack immediately by discarding cards that are expensive, and then flipping into a leader that allows you to discard any card to make big things ambush out is decently strong. Now, a lot of the force-based game plan was pretty strong just because there's cards in there that really work in the early game and then can set you up to actually get to your late game with Pre-Vizslas and Chimeras and things like that. He does oftentimes play Vigilance on the side, which means that you do get to play a lot of those cards, which is really, really nice. So all those things are bonuses for Dryden. And I do think that actually does benefit him a decent amount. I don't think he's necessarily particularly amazing. I have not seen any results from him. No one's really playing this guy, so I can't really warrant him being above Sloan and Yularen right now, just because he's kind of a little bit of an unknown factor. I found it to be a little bit weak, just because when you're discarding a bunch of cards, right, you're not going to get enough value from the ambush to make up for the fact that you're just getting 2 for 1 and 3 for 1 for from all the best decks in the format. And that's kind of the whole point of Dryden. The whole point of Dryden was I'm using my action for late game disadvantage, but for the fact that I can accelerate my game plan and keep myself alive. A lot of these decks are trying to get to the mid to the late game anyways, and then you're just playing with cards down. And that sucks really bad. Next up, we've got Piet. Now this one I've been debating because he's definitely at least A tier. So he's going to start in A tier. The question is he S tier? And I think if you look at kind of how well he's performed based on what the meta truly is and how many decks we have in the format, I actually do think Piet probably should enter into S tier. Probably should. If you look and I compare, okay, where is Piet? What was the conversion rate? He was really solid across all the tournaments so far. He actually has had a win. He actually has had quite a few top 8s. And overall, his win percentage across all the decks, or all the games that he's played, has been pretty strong. He's gotten a bunch of new capital ships that are really interesting. Eviscerator has been one that I've actually found to be pretty strong, which is not something that I was expecting necessarily. But overall, like, if you're in a game plan where it's I need to get to the mid game and I need to value my opponent, Piet does it better oftentimes than a lot of other decks because you get to accelerate so much faster. Just by deploying Piet, you can play all your late game capital ships so quickly. Oftentimes the curve is 5 resources, I deploy my invisible hand, I get another unit out of it, which is already tough to deal with. Into the next turn, I play Devastator. That is a curve that most decks just cannot deal with. And then every single turn after that, you have to be worried about another capital ship coming out because oftentimes they have it. And they always have the turn 1 gonk. So, gonna put him in S tier. I do think he is kind of edging on the high A tier component. I don't think he's as good as Ahsoka or Krennic. And I do think it doesn't necessarily match up extremely well up against Ahsoka or Krennic. So there you go. That's why I think he's kind of borderline A tier. So, but he's got some new capital ships, still doing his ramp thing. Cheating on resource cost is a good thing in this game. He's got to be S tier still. Snoke is next up, and this one has always been a little bit interesting. Kind of the quintessential one resource, kind of get some experience tokens that we've seen across a lot of other leaders in the past. And you know what? He has been one of the better ones that to do it, but it's never been amazing. Never been amazing. You do have to play villainy units to make it work. And you oftentimes will just play a normal deck, and you're hoping that the one resource to pay for those extra experience tokens is worthwhile. He's a 6 deploy 4/7 that gives experience tokens oftentimes to himself. And overall, this game plan of kind of playing just like a natural unit curve out deck with experience tokens is just not amazing. It's not bad, but it's not amazing. And that's where he ends up. I think I'm actually going to keep him like right in the end of B tier. Nothing too bad about him. You can definitely have some pretty strong turns, and there are some Sentinels that he now works with, like Imperial Armored Commando is a great card in Snoke, because you can make it 4 toughness, which is oftentimes enough to get out of the range of some cards. But overall, it's nothing too powerful. Just solid. Just a decent B tier list. Next up, we've got Vader. Now, this one has been extremely popular. Another one where, do I put it in S tier or do I put it in A tier? I think I've got to put it in S tier just because of the magnitude that it's been played and the actual performance that it has. I'm going to put it above Piet. We've got a lot of command cards in S tier, huh? Kind of interesting. Not all of them Vigilance. At least Darth Vader's one shaking up a little bit. Piet's oftentimes aggression as well, so something to think about there. But Darth Vader here, he's got a very strong conversion rate as well. Multiple top 8s. No wins under his belt, really, for some of the bigger tournaments, but decent win rate across the games that he's played. Extremely popular list. Overall, just lots of space units. It is very difficult for some decks to deal with that many units at a time and just deal with constant stream of space units. You need Sentinels oftentimes to deal with it, but then your opponent oftentimes has ways to interact with that, either by bouncing or getting rid of your cards. One of the strongest things about him is the fact that you can play a lot of weird disruptive elements. So Hold for Questioning is very good to pick apart your opponent's hand. Garindin to go ahead and take the answer to your deck out when you deploy Vader. And a bunch of other things like that that just make it so that it's difficult to get what you need to defeat Vader. That's what makes him truly powerful. You know, it's a tale as old as time if you played a lot of card games. Aggro and disruption or going wide and disruption is just a very easy way to win in a lot of cases. And you know what? He's done a pretty good job with that. So I'm going to put him in S tier. Very solid list. Next up, we got Obi-Wan. I had high hopes for this guy, but as soon as I saw Cad Bane more and more, it was just doomed for my friend Obi-Wan here. Still very, very solid game plan of having the Force. I think the old Virgin's Temple days are completely over for Obi-Wan. You just cannot afford to play Virgin's Temple when your opponent can immediately take you off of it. The whole point of Virgin's Temple is getting the Force on turn 1. So it's pretty much only relegated to the attack on get Force on attack base now. And 28 HP is kind of risky to run in this format. There's a lot of decks that, like I said, with Ahsoka or even Vader or other decks out there that could just kind of not one-shot you, but really put in a lot of damage. And then, of course, using the Force to get experience tokens on things when your opponents have answers to all of them or big sentinels to block the path isn't necessarily all that great. One of the strengths of Obi-Wan is that you could control the board with your units by putting experience tokens on them and leaving them behind, which is really good. Nowadays, the way your opponents answered is by just having higher quality cards or just things that don't interact with unit-based stuff. So like I hit your unit and then I play something that kills it or something of that nature. Is he weak? No, but I don't think he's nearly as strong as he once was. I think he's kind of like the top of B tier. He's one of those lists that still is very good, still does compete, and I can't put it above Kylo, actually. I can't. And actually, he's at the top of B tier, don't get me wrong. I think he's like right behind Kylo. I just think that like the villainy vigilance controlling structure is really tough to beat. So if you have a deck that's really involved in that, like Kylo, I think Obi-Wan has got to go beneath that. But overall, he's not terrible. He's definitely a solid list. Definitely still somewhat competitive, but definitely dropping into that store showdown tier, whereas otherwise he would have been an S tier last set. So a little bit of a fall from grace from him as well. Next up, we've got the other Force leader here in Avar Chris. Definitely an interesting one. You can guarantee get the Force whenever you want, which means you don't have to play the Force base, although oftentimes people do, to make sure that you have an 8-10 overwhelming leader. Another interesting leader similar to Bo-Katan, where it doesn't necessarily cost 9 to deploy, but rather enough usage of the Force plus the resources gets you to 9, then you can deploy her. So if you use the Force twice and you got 7 resources, you can deploy her as an 8-10 overwhelm, assuming you have the Force when you do so. So very, very like high statted leader, but you need to get there. And oftentimes the Force heroism game plan has been a lot weaker these days. There's just not enough payoff for the cards that you've got. Even if you're ramping a little bit, people are just better than you in the late game with the Vigilance villainy game plan or Command villainy game plan. And that's what Avar wants to do. Now, you can leverage her as a leader itself, which is interesting in terms of just being a big beater on your own, which isn't bad. But overall, she just doesn't perform nearly as well as she was even last set. So definitely, again, all these heroism cards oftentimes just getting a little bit weaker overall. So going to end her in somewhere around the mid to bottom of B tier. She actually has shown up a decent amount and actually has not performed like incredibly terribly. So I think it's worthwhile just kind of slapping her in the middle pack of B tier. Next up, we've got Holdo, which, well, we've got an action to give a resistance unit or a unit with a resistance upgrade on it, +2/+2 for 1 resource. In Command Heroism, not a very good ability. You know, it's kind of similar to the Balin's, where, like, some cases can be relevant, but in at least Balin's case, you can just guarantee give it to any unit, assuming it's the only one. There are not a crazy amount of resistance cards in the format. And, like, we've got a couple of them, like Poe Dameron and Unsanctioned Patrol, which are resistance cards. But oftentimes, in order for this to really, truly work, you need to play a lot of resistance cards. And most of them are pretty bad. Most of them are pretty bad. And they all basically came from Jump to Light Speed. So just too few options to make this truly work. Too few options to make this truly work. I think she's a D tier. And in fact, if you truly want to make it work, you're probably making your deck just bad because the cards that you need to play to make this work is few and far between. Like that means you're putting like Crate True Veteran in your deck, or you know, like playing Lore San Tekka or something like that. Like these are not good cards at all to try to make the resistance game plan work. So sorry for Holdo, but D tier. And lastly, for Command here, we've got Wedge. So Wedge here, pretty solid. Honestly, this is one where I oftentimes will put it somewhere in the B or C tier. And I think right now he's actually matching up pretty well. I'm actually going to put him solidly in the B tier because so far he's been played not a terrible amount, but a decent amount in across tournaments. And he's actually performed better than a lot of the other lists, even above him. in terms of effectiveness. Now, it's a small sample size, so I'm going to make that, known, but the game plan of just going really, really fast with a lot of pilots is strong. It is very, very strong. And we do have some new space units that work well with Wedge. No new pilots, of course, but also plot cards are really good within, right? If you wanted to go that route. And more importantly, you just have more options to play. And Admiral Akbar is a brand new card that is amazing in Wedge. One of the easiest ways to lose the game is, okay, I've played all my space units in all my cards, literally all my cards by the time I deploy Wedge. So I have nothing left to play, and I need to be able to win the game. And sometimes you can. In the past, that's what it ended on. Now, Akbar allows you to keep that one last card in hand, which basically refills your entire board to allow you all the future draws to be relevant. That is something that did not exist before, and that bumped up Wedge from like a low B, high C to I think a higher B tier, more like middle of the pack. But his actually win percentage has gone up drastically from previous iterations. Starting us off in the foray to aggression here, we've got Third Sister. Third Sister, always been one of those cards where it's like, yeah, you could just win games by hitting things. You can just win games by hitting things. And mind you, wherever I put it initially, that's just not where I'm going to keep them. I'm just putting them on the list so you guys can see what we've got. But Third Sister, I've got a 5 to deploy 5/4, which is very, very aggressive, but dies very easily to a lot of different things, is also pretty bad against Sentinels. One of the things that she was really good against is other units hitting her because she's got hidden. But if your opponent just has a thing where you have to get through, well, that's really bad. I think she's gotten a lot worse, actually, and I'd actually put her probably somewhere in the C tier now, where before I probably would have put her at the low B tier just because you can just win games by having a 5-powered leader that you can't interact with when you deploy her. And oftentimes it was, I play Third Sister, I play an upgrade. Nowadays, you have to play kind of Cunning, which you were oftentimes before, and you have to play some sort of Saboteur thing in order for her to work, which just gives her less options than she did before. And that just makes her a little bit worse. So I'm going to put her in the top of C tier now. Similar to Third Sister, where you got a high-powered unit or leader that comes in and smacks things, Sebulba is here to play. Now, Sebulba is, I think, a little bit better than Third Sister, mainly because he deploys on 4. So because he deploys on 4, it means that you can actually get in some swings beforehand. And that means that I'm going to put him in like the very low end of B tier. You also have some really cool synergy with some of the discard components of this. Like you can play BT1 and 000, and then you're guaranteed to get that 5 hit from 000. Not guaranteed, but you're very, very likely to get that 5 hit from 000. You're also able to play like Sebulba's Pod Racer, which can potentially get you a lot of damage in. And you also do have the ability to give raid 1. Like you can push a lot of damage in some circumstances just to, power through your opponent. So against some matchups where your opponents are playing Sentinels, this can be kind of weak because Sebulba has to get through them too. But he is a 2/5 with raid 1, which is very, very important because one of the most commonly played Sentinels alongside Marok is that Imperial Armored Commando. And the fact that you do get 3 powers means that, and you live, means that Sebulba can potentially finish off the Imperial Armored Commando and then still attack afterwards, which is very, very important. So, low B tier. He actually has shown up a good amount, and he actually has performed decently well. So, can't put him below B tier. Vayne is in a similar vein as the Sebulba and Third Sister. Lots of aggression villainy leaders to start out with here. Just a 5 to deploy 3/6 that has this action to defeat a friendly upgrade, deal 2 damage to a base. Obviously, the idea with this is with advantage tokens, you get advantage tokens, you can defeat them for essentially +1 damage to your opponent, and you don't need to attack with it. That's the whole game plan with Vayne. There are some other synergies like emergency powers and getting in a big swing and then defeating those upgrades, right, and getting in a bunch of damage. This guy hasn't really shown up at all for the most part. I don't think his game plan is like necessarily extremely powerful, but you do have ways to get in damage through Sentinels, and you oftentimes deploy a lot to the space arena, so you can have a lot of evasive damage that otherwise other decks cannot. I actually think he ends up somewhere around the Third Sister level. The question is this ability stronger than Third Sister? And I would say yes, but does that make up for the fact that he is just 5 power from Third Sister? And I think yes, because 4 toughness is really bad. So I think somewhere around the high C tier component of decks here. Nothing too crazy, but has some reach where other decks do not. Ezra is next up, and this is one that's actually surprisingly very, very played, and yet really not that powerful in all things considered. I think when you look at this versus like another leader on this list, which we'll talk about a lot later on, he's just the weaker version of it, which immediately, in my opinion, puts you in B tier. Immediately puts you in B tier. But he's actually like one of the top 10 or top 15 most played lists across the tournaments that we've got so far. And he has the lowest win rate of them all. So really just truly not strong. The win rate is lower than things like Obi-Wan and Palp and Yularen, and overall it's just the game plan that he wants to do, which is I want to play out units and then I want to play out other units before I attack so that I can go ahead and get that advantage token put on that unit, is really bad up against decks that are just killing your units oftentimes with just higher value things. And then, of course, because they're killing your units or putting up Sentinels, advantage tokens do a lot worse. The best part about him is that he's a 5 deploy 3/6 with Saboteur. Saboteur is really strong, and that does give him some legs, but I actually truly don't think he is really stronger than where he's placed right here, which is like a little bit higher than a mid-B tier portion leader. He's just not that great. A lot of people are playing him, and he's just never performed great across all the games that we've seen so far. Mandalorian, probably the biggest tragedy so far in the new set, which is Mandalorian seeming like a cool leader with Grogu and taking initiative and things like that. And it just turned out to be I play no units, I claim initiative, I draw cards, and then I play big villainy cards. You know, that's the last thing I want to see for my aggression heroism leader. He's a solid A tier. I definitely on the higher end of things. You know, it turns out playing villainy cards in your splash deck, in the more controlling deck, is pretty good. His win rate isn't like incredible by any means, but I do think he stacks up reasonably well against some of the other decks beneath him. And overall, he does have a game plan that is strong. And if you do get to that late game, this truly is a full control deck. If you do get to that late game, then you will probably win. Things like Rebellious Hammerhead come down and is like really just too good 2-for-1. You've got things like Anakin, also same curve, 2-for-1. You've got big, Pre-Vizslas and Chimeras to come down. You've got Wraths to come in your deck. And it's just overall just really, really obnoxious leader. And like I said, this to me is the biggest tragedy of the set, is when we have this really, really cool leader. Probably would be played otherwise, to be honest, but really, really interesting leader that can like power out some other things and do something with the initiative and have a lot of cards in your hand. And then he just ends up being a full control leader with villainy cards in the deck. I mean, some people may like that, but I just think that's truly telling of what the format is like now. Daedra is the next one, and this one is pretty often played as well, but I think is a little bit slept on compared to some of the other villainy vigilance controlling leaders. I think she ends up being a lot stronger than those other ones that we've seen, and it just isn't played as often. I think she's solidly like an A tier list. Whether it's above Aura or below, I think is up to debate, but I do think she's in this tier, right? And I'm going to put her at the top of A tier because I truly think she is very, very strong. She has a very interesting game plan that other decks do not. Whereas like Cad Bane and Aura Singh and Townsend, not even necessarily Townsend, but some of the other vigilance, villainy, aggression leaders, or even command leaders, are going into the mid to late game and truly using Pre-Vizsla and Chimera, which Daedra can do. She actually has an early to deploy with Marok, with Imperial Armored Commando, that can actually put a lot of pressure on you, which might be surprising. You can actually end the game very quickly with Daedra. And I think that's something that Daedra players really understand, and something that a lot of other players are hard pressed to deal with, right? You can be in this spot where I need to put enough on board to deal with Daedra, but then that might put me behind in the late game to have to deal with all of her late game stuff, because she is a truly like mid to late game control leader, but just has this weird dynamic of being able to end the game quickly, which I think is very strong. She's performed very well. Quite a few players playing her, similarly to Ezra, but then has like, above 52% win rate, which is very strong. So I'm going to put her at the top of A tier. I think she's a very, very strong list and definitely comparable to some of the leaders that are leveraging a lot of the very good cards in the format right now. Next up, we've got Boba, the king of the previous set, alongside Lando. And he has been in the format lately, but not as strong as I think a lot of people were hoping to be. He has a really pretty strong game plan up against like true control decks like Mandalorian. If they don't have units on the board, you can do a surprising amount of damage with Boba Fett. Having the ability to just exhaust him any time to deal an extra damage essentially is really good. Then you have this deploy, which is super obnoxious, being able to hit a bunch of units if you deploy him as a pilot, and then potentially having the plot mechanics like Topple the Summit to just completely wreck unit-based decks. That's what kept him really high up. These days, he's been played a lot and really hasn't performed as well. Now, I don't think he's weak by any means, but I think he's kind of situated somewhere around the top of A tier. I would actually put him behind Aura in terms of results. I think this is a very, very interesting conversation because, how do you rate decks? Is it through personal experience? Is it through, theoretical matchups? Is it through actual performance? And in this case, I'm just going to take the actual performance based on the amount of games played. If you look at like Ahsoka, for example, her conversion rate has been pretty amazing. If you look at like the amount of decks games played with the amount of wins that have had, Boba Fett, his conversion rate isn't terrible, especially when you get to like top day 2 and top 8. But his win rate's really bad comparatively. Like Ahsoka is like higher 52%. Boba's under 48%, which is very concerning in terms of if you're looking for a competitively viable list. Now, that might just be because when you do filter down to those higher top decks, you're going to be fighting against other meta lists. And Boba Fett, I think, does not necessarily have a great matchup against some of them. Like Ahsoka, her whole game plan doesn't revolve necessarily around having a bunch of units on the board. So Top of the Summit isn't necessarily amazing against her, and she can just end the game. But, up against like maybe some other decks, like if you're trying to fight against Obi-Wan, it's going to be absolutely disgusting. And Obi-Wan can basically never win. Or Ezra, for example, can basically never win. Because you just completely wipe their entire board unless they're killing you before you can do so, which is very, very rare. And then you find yourself up against the more controlling list, and that can be a little bit tough as well. So, some good matchups for Boba still, some bad matchups for sure. Overall, his performance has been much, much less good than expected. So I think I've got to put him like still at the top of 8 tier, still a very good list, still a very competitive list. And, we did have a finalist in the Galactic Championship with Boba Fett. So he's still up there. Don't get me wrong. But that just goes to show you how well he's performing afterwards, despite having a really, really good finish with one of the best players. And it might just be a pilot error for the deck, where the deck can be a little bit more tricky than it otherwise seems. So maybe I'm underrating him because of that, but I'm really just factoring in the performance of the global Boba Fett's right now, and that puts them in the top of A tier, behind Aura, Sig, and Daedra, and then the rest of the S tier lists. Next up, we've got the intro Battle to Hoth Vader. This one's kind of fun. I've seen a lot of people try to make this work. This one's just very simple. Pay 1, deal 1 damage to a base. That's his action, right? Aggression, villainy, 6 to deploy, 3/8. You deal a bunch of damage to base on attack. This guy truly is like your burn leader, and it can be actually reasonable. It can be reasonable. I don't think the actual leader is that powerful. 3, it's obviously not great for 6, but you can have this very aggressive, like uninteractable damage that some decks really struggle with. And having that reach can give you a decent matchup against some decks. So I'm torn because this guy's never played. No one basically even knows about him, similar to the Leia. And that means that we don't have a lot of data for him. But I actually think the damage-based effect is pretty powerful in some matchups. So I think I'm going to give him the top of C tier. And that's as far as I'll go. Despite the fact that he has a very costly action in terms of resources, and his leader stat line's not that great and all that stuff, I think he actually has a solid game plan against certain matchups, and you can still just play the aggression villainy game plan, and then you can just slowly ping away your opponent. 1 damage every turn. Boom, 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 boom. And that could close out the game. Still playing that more controlling style that other decks are as well. Captain Phasma. Another leader that, kind of similar to Darth Vader, has this weird action to just guarantee damage into your opponent's base. Now, after rotation, we lost so many good things with Captain Phasma that I was really down. And, since then, what have we gotten? Nothing. We've gotten nothing. No first order love at all. We've gotten basically nothing. I don't think she's gotten much better. I don't think she's terrible. She is a 5 to deploy 4/6 that has this damaging action. The problem is that you have to play first order every single turn in order to make it work. And there's not enough first order cards to really be excited about. The best card we've gotten is like FN Trooper Corps, which was back in Secrets of Power. So yeah, we've been starving a little bit for first order cards here with Phasma. I don't think she is very strong. I don't think she is terrible. I think the fact that you have to play first order to make her work does make her a little bit weaker. She's kind of into that Bo-Katan tier where, like, yes, very powerful, but you have to play this specific tribal faction that doesn't really have support right now. And therefore, you make your deck a little bit weaker because of that. Otherwise, if you just played normal aggression villainy cards, like if you play BT1 and 000, you're probably better off than playing the first order cards that you could in those slots, which kind of stinks. So yeah, C tier. Darth Vader is really, really honestly kind of tragic to look at. Very, very similar to another leader that deals 1 damage, but you have to discard a card for it to make it work, which is a very big cost. Aggression villainy, we've got a 7 to deploy, which is kind of late in the game. And then we have the ability on him on the backside, which you can discard a bunch of cards in your hand and deal a bunch of damage on attack or deal damage to a unit. I think there's 2 things that, like, when you compare this to another pinging leader, they're not comparable at all, by the way. But if you were to compare them, let's say, you have 1 turn later to deploy, which is really, really a big downside. And 2, you have to have so many cards in your hand to make this work. The format is no longer about Cheofane and drawing cards and doing the aggressive negotiations thing. There's too many Sentinels in the game. And so I don't think that you're really going to get the combo finish that you otherwise would be in Darth Vader previously. And you still can, but it's a lot harder with the Sentinels in place. And then at the same token, you just have a much weaker game plan. I don't think this is a bad leader by any means. I don't think it's like amazing. I would probably put it somewhere at the bottom of B tier. He has shown up a little bit. You are in aggression, villainy, vigilance, which is a good combination. The 1 damage ping can do some things. You still have that combo finish. You have a 7 to deploy leader though, which is a lot later, so you can fold to some of the more aggressive decks above it. So yeah, I put it at like the bottom of B tier. It's not terrible. You could argue that it's a C tier list, but it hasn't been that terrible to play. Enfys Nest is next up. This one really all about those on attack triggers. Anytime you use one, you can pay 2 to copy it. 5 deploy 3/7 that just copies on attack triggers. Really, this is all about like the bomber, the TIE bomber, or not the TIE bomber, but the resistance bomber, where you can go ahead and double up those indirect damage triggers, or you can have something like the earlier space units that have indirect damage triggers, or like Enfys Nest helmet to double up. I don't think her deploy is actually that bad. Just doubling up any on-attack trigger for free is pretty strong. We just haven't gotten that many on-attack triggers. Before, she was kind of performing at like a mid to low B tier level. I don't think she's really changed all that much. We haven't really, like I said, gotten any on-attack triggers that are extremely relevant. I do think Sentinels have hurt her a little bit, because really you want a kind of clear path that you don't have to interact with your opponent's units to do so. You can like double up Hu Yang triggers if you want, or double up like the Leo Organa trigger, which, you know, you can heal up a little bit more from the base. But the rest of it, it's like, yeah, there's not really any on-attack triggers that I'm super excited about. The only one that really truly was very powerful is the Yellow Aces Bomber. Yellow Aces Bomber was very, very powerful, and that one can double up and give you some extra damage into base. But other than that, I don't think she's gotten a little any stronger, and I don't think that the Sentinels have treated her well, so I'm going to put her at the very bottom of B tier here. Darth Maul is up next. This one has been played quite a bit. I was kind of surprised, actually, when I was looking at the lists. I know I've seen Darth Maul quite a bit out there, but I was just surprised to see him as popular as he has been, and he's been performing very well, very well. He actually has a really, really good matchup against one of the decks in S tier, which is Darth Vader. Just being able to knock out multiple space units every single turn is very, very strong. Even if you're only dealing 1 to like a very, very important unit and then dealing with their token immediately after, that can give you a pretty strong game plan in some circumstances. Doesn't mean Vader doesn't have a path to win or anything like that. The damage across multiple units is very, very strong. You do have a 6 to deploy 5/6, which is pretty aggressive and can close out games. You are in Vigilance territory, which means you got Previslas, you got Chimeras if you want them. You got Maroks to play, Imperial Armored Commandos, very powerful Sentinels. You basically have everything that's good, but then you also have that Force package with Talzin's Assassin and Karis and Secretive Sage in the early game to have this extra ability to be able to mess with your opponent's units a little bit more, which can be strong in certain circumstances. So overall, pretty strong. I would definitely put it up here with like the Talzins and such. I would put it below probably Mandalorian. It's kind of close because Mandalorian's been played more but performed worse. So I think I'll put him above the Mandalorian. I think it's very similar to Talzin, how you kind of want to play out the game. In that you kind of do control the board a lot more with the force-based cards. And then you have this leader that will pretty much end the game for you, assuming your opponent just doesn't completely outvalue you at that point. So overall, not bad. Next up, we got Kit Fisto. Ooh, everyone loves a Kit Fisto, huh? I know Kit Fisto is a lot of your favorites out there. He's a D tier. Okay, he's just a D tier. Do we need to say more? Oh yeah, okay, we do. So if we attack with a Jedi, we can pay some resource to deal 2 damage to a unit. But he's a 5 to deploy 1/6 with Saboteur. 1/6. At best in this format, you're getting like a 3/6. At best, you're not getting better than that. I'm gonna be honest. And a lot of the cards that you want to be playing now, because they're strong cards, are not Jedi. There just haven't been a lot of Jedi cards being printed. So you're just playing with an old batch of cards that you're trying to support a 1/6. Yeah, that's not good. It's not good at all. It's a 1/6, guys. I literally just cannot say enough bad things about Kit Fisto, to be honest. Sorry, Kit Fisto enjoyers. It's honestly a fun deck, but a 1/6? Yeah, no thanks. Chewbacca is next up, and this one has fallen quite a bit from what it used to do and used to be. We're seeing in the past with the like 1 resource deal some damage to a unit a lot more relevant because, you know, your opponents actually wanted that tempo and to put units on the board. Nowadays, they're just putting big fat sentinels in your way, and, you know, dealing the damage doesn't really change the math of the whole thing. Like, if your opponent has an Imperial Armored Commando and you've used his action, Chewbacca's action that is, you got rid of the shield token, but you could have just done that with a Chewbacca on attack. If your opponent's playing Marok and you use the action from Chewbacca, and then you attack it with one of your units, you probably have to use the action again or the Chewbacca attack or an attack again, which is much worse than actually being able to kill off a unit. And I think that's the biggest problem with Chewbacca. He's not terrible. He's been played a little bit here and there, but he's kind of on that level of like middle of the pack B tier nowadays, / lower on the list. I would probably put him somewhere around like this tier in the middle area. So yeah, just not very strong. Right now, the tempo advantage you're getting from the resource usage of his deal 2 damage is not nearly as strong as it was in the previous set. And then putting all your resources in to deploy out a 5/6, which probably just gets answered by 1 Sentinel, is bad. It is very, very bad, right? Like if you're playing Chewbacca and you deploy out a Sentinel or you deploy out Chewbacca, yeah, you got a 5/6, but your opponent can play 4 resources, and then yeah, sure, maybe you kill it like an Imperial Armored Commando, but then you're left with a 5/2. And you use 4 resources to do no damage. And your opponent probably has a way to kill it with damage afterwards. They don't need removal to kill your unit. So, yeah, gonna be a middle pack B tier now instead of the S tier or A tier as it was before. Ooh, we got a stinker here, huh? Rey is next up, and this one's an easy one. This one's just a D tier. It might be the worst leader in the game. I've talked about this one a lot, but you have to play non-unit force cards to get the action, which is 1 damage to a unit. So you're playing bad force cards to get 1 damage to a unit, which other unit characters do with just like their action. Oh my gosh, the injustice for Rey, huh? Then you have a leader deploy, which sure, I guess has a good stat line. Nothing wrong with a 6/8, right? 6/8 on your 7 to deploy leader, right? Nothing wrong with that by any means. But her deploy is discard your hand, draw 2. When is that ever going to be relevant? Like, the whole thing about aggression, heroism oftentimes is either you're super aggressive or you've got like rebellious hammerheads and big things like that to be doing. This doesn't want to be doing that. I don't know. There's nothing with Rey. I've seen people try to take advantage of her action on the front side, and it feels bad. Like, I'm like, whoa, you're playing that card? Good luck. I feel like by you playing that card, I have a better chance to win now, which is always great. And now we get to the heaviest hitter of the entire list. Spoiler alert. We've got Cad Bane, baby. Yep, it's all command in the S tier, with the exception of Cad Bane right now. Cad Bane is just obnoxious. I've talked about, Darth Vader or Rey even in the previous leader. This one is just deal 1 damage to unit with 2 or more remaining HP. Basically, deal a damage to a unit. Basically, that's what it says. There are very, very, very few times where this action is not the best thing you could be doing. You've got so many cards that work so well with already having damage on opponent's units. TIE Dagger Vanguard. You've got cards like Cyborg Mech. You've just got the incredible suite of aggression, vigilance, villainy cards. Not only do you have like those Cyber Mech, you got like IG-2000. You've got Justifiers. All those work with damage based on cards. BT-1. Then you've got the Sentinels like Marok or Imperial Armored Commando to work with your deck. So you have that game plan finish. You've got some really nice space interaction with the cards I mentioned previously. You've got like Ogdo if you want to push in extra damage in the beginning of the game. And then guess what you could finish the game out with? Pre-Vizslas, Chimeras, Ninth Sister, which are the three most played set 8 cards, and for good reason, because they are just some of the most disgusting cards in the game. And we talked about how other decks are trying to splash for them. This deck can just play them all for free, right? I mean, not for free, but it's in the deck. It's in the deck. It's in the aspects. There is not enough things that can be said about Cad Bane. And you know what? We've got to do it. We've got to do it. Okay, we've got to do it. We're just gonna add a row. Very nice. Oh wait, whoops. I messed this up. We're trolling live on camera. Okay, we're trolling live on camera. We're just gonna name this the CAD tier, and then we're just gonna put CAD there. There we go. Much better. And this truly is what is being shown right now. Like, yes, Director Krennic has a similar win rate to Cad Bane. Very, very similar. Very, very close. It's like within 0.1% or something like that. As I mentioned earlier, 0.1, 0.2%. But Cad Bane has almost triple the amount, almost 4 times the amount of decks competing with the same win rate, which is far and above like anything else, with the most wins by far and the highest conversion rate. It literally has everything you could possibly ask for. It is crazy. It has 40% of the major tournaments that are being run right now as wins. This is like a separate tier. Now, I haven't done this since like we talked about Boba or we talked about like set 4 Django before the bans. This list, or this leader specifically, is truly, truly obnoxious and truly, truly, truly has a step above even the S tier leaders out there, I think, right now. Which is why I'm doing this video so soon after the set release, because I do think Cad Bane probably is going to be banned. So I better post this video quick, because I think that Cad Bane might be on the chopping block. So yeah, there's the CAD tier, guys, and let's move on to the next one. We need to take a step down back into reality here with Major Vonreg, another pilot leader. Decently aggressive, can have some really nice starts. I think this really comes around the same time as Sebulba, or really the same game plan as Sebulba. You have this action that really requires you to stall out your game plan a little bit because you need to use the action, then attack. You have a 4 to deploy leader. One is more space focused, one is more ground focused. That has very similar game plan and very similar damage amounts. They're very, very similar in the way they play, Vonreg and Sebulba. And I think the performance of them has also been very, very similar in terms of how many decks are played and their win rate so far. They haven't really shown up a whole lot, but yeah, I mean, you can win games by just putting out units and hitting your opponent's face. Pretty simple like that. But Sebulba has much more of a ground focus. Vonreg really wants to be playing space units because you got the pilot mechanic and you also have the vehicles. If I were to decide who's stronger, I think Sebulba is a little bit stronger because I think that just playing the good ground units tends to be more conducive to winning game plans up against a lot more decks than just playing all space. Yes, all space can be good, and it can dodge the Sentinels, but also you're playing units that have a lot less power and a lot less like stats to them, which can be risky. Well, Fennec almost jumped into the aggression pile. I had to move that down there to the multicolors and villainy and heroism. But we got Luke Skywalker next up, and this one is an S tier. This one is an S tier. The question is, where does it go in the S tier? So we got an aggression heroism. If you attack with a fighter unit this phase, you get to deal 1 damage to something. Nice deploy that can't be interacted with upgrade hate, which is really, really powerful. I think that's something that really benefits it. And you have some really powerful plot options, like Cinta, for example, coming down. One of the cards that really make this better is Akbar. Akbar is in the Luke deck. You got like basically all space strategy. You also have some really powerful big space units that you deploy out that have just a lot of stats on them. And if you put Luke on them, it's much more difficult to deal with that unit than otherwise before. And you can just kind of take over the game that way. And he is top 5 most played lists. And he has a really, really strong win rate. Stronger than basically any other list here, with the exception of Krennic. And I think that's where I'm going to put him. I'm going to put him kind of the number 2 deck so far in the format. I don't think he's quite as strong as Krennic in a lot of situations, but I do think he has some better matchups, and I do think he has some worse ones. But I do think his game plan overall is very, very strong, and it's very similar to like these 3 leaders, the ones that are really utilizing their immediate leader deploy, is very, very good combination of leaders. Like Ahsoka, you deploy your leader, you get this big combo attack turn. Darth Vader, you deploy your leader, you got this big disruptive, I'm going to exhaust your units and I'm going to attack your hand and then I'm just going to kill you. Luke, I'm going to deploy my leader, I'm going to get immediate attack, I'm going to kill your units, and then I'm going to claim initiative and do the same thing next turn. all these leaders really leverage that immediate action efficiency, and it can be really, really tough to deal with. So yeah, Luke, very, very strong, very, very powerful. Win rate so far, lots of decks played, a pretty solid converting rate, and actually has taken down multiple tournaments, which is also something that not a lot of decks can say otherwise, because Cad Bane is in the Cad Bane tier. Yeah, I said it. Following that aggression heroism leader up, we've got Luthen, another aggression heroism leader. When a friendly unit is attacking, we get defeated while attacking, you get to go ahead and deal some damage, huh? Honestly, this is actually pretty good against the Sentinels out there. You kind of trade up and cut your way through, which is actually pretty good. But other than that, I mean, it's an aggro deck, 5 to deploy 2/7 with a really weak leader in terms of power. And also your units want to kill themselves to kill their units or deal damage, but you want to hit in for damage because it's an aggro deck. So lots of, kind of things that don't really work all that well together. That said, I mean, I don't think it's terrible. I do think it's kind of a reasonable aggro deck that you can get a lot of value out of, and can push in a lot of damage. So overall, I mean, it's in the B tier category. I think I'm going to put it on the lower end. It's kind of similar like the Sebulbas and Von Regs for me. I think it's a little bit better than that. So yeah, around the middle to low B tier component for Luthen. Governor Price. I had high hopes for Governor Price. I was like, ooh, pay 1 to ready a token unit. Maybe we can do some piloting shenanigans and put Darth Vader on the tokens and then ready it up. And yeah, it's just not that great. 6 to deploy 4/6 that creates some spy tokens and does their thing. I mean, the front side action just does nothing like 90% of the time. And then the 10% that it does, it oftentimes is going to be messed up because you try to put something on your token and then do something cool with that. But it's not going to work because people got waylays and they've got, or not waylays, but beguiles. And they've got interactive events to murder your token. And then you're trying to go wide with a Price that probably just dies when she comes down because she's, not super tanky and then really wants to get in attacks. And then you have to kind of set it up with extra 0 or exhausted units. So it's just kind of all things that you don't really want to be doing. 6 to deploy for like kind of an aggro leader is just way too late if you're truly trying to get to that game plan. I talked about Sebulba, Von Reg, Third Sister, Vayne. All these decks are kind of like, okay, you can win games by just having an earlier deploy leader that puts in a lot of damage or an action that pushes damage. This one technically has an action that pushes damage, but it costs a resource where none of these other ones do. And your deploy is 6. Yeah, it's just going to be beneath them. I think it's a pretty weak one. I'm going to put it at the bottom of C tier. It's just basically what these decks do, but worse. So yeah, C tier. Cassian is next up, and I do think this one has an interesting dynamic. So we talked about like Luthen being like an aggro aggression heroism leader that, you kind of have all these mixed things going on. Cassian's very straightforward. If a friendly unit is attacked or damaged an opponent's base, it can't be attacked this turn. So you have a lot of units that can't be interacted with, which is nice. You still have to kit through the Sentinels, which is a dangerous component. But then you have a 6 to deploy 6/2 that says if you have the initiative, you basically can't have it die. This can be extremely obnoxious with Cinta, right? With Cinta, you put down your leader, you get an immediate attack in, you get to go ahead and basically get your damage in and then claim initiative, and then your opponent doesn't really have a way to deal with Cassian. Now, you can't just put like Condemn on it and then kill it. Sure. But if you don't have that specific scenario, it can be very obnoxious. So I do think it has an X factor that like some of the other aggro decks don't have, like Ezra or Chewbacca or Eluthen. I think Ezra is a little bit better than it because of Saboteur. I think that's super relevant, but I do think these are very close, and I do think Cassian's actually got a really, really good game plan. So I'm going to put it at the higher end of B tier. And lastly, for aggression, we got Poe Dameron. This one, a little bit more space-oriented because you can pay 1 to make this a pilot onto something at +2/+1 and do the thing, right? You got a 5 to deploy, 4/6, which is a good stat line, right? So a lot of things going for Poe Dameron, but it is mostly a space deck, and it is kind of just a linear aggro deck. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. Nothing wrong with that. It is very similar to like the other aggro decks that I've talked about, right? There's a lot of games where you can just win the game by just putting space units down and putting a pilot on them and then just hitting face. And that's really what Poe Dameron's doing. That's really all he's doing. And he does it pretty well. I'm trying to figure out if I want to put him above these. I feel like it... Oh, it's so interesting because Ezra is the one that's the most played out of any group in the B tier, but it's also the one that's performed like arguably the worst. Not the worst compared to like some of these bottom B tier ones, but definitely the ones, kind of up here. Poe Dameron hasn't performed nearly as well as Ezra, So I got to put it below Ezra, but I think it's actually stronger than Wedge. It has a similar game plan as Wedge, but then has more resiliency. So it's not as swingy, but has some extra game plan to work with. I think that's where it's going to end up. They're all very similar, and I think that, Ezra is the most played, but also the most overhyped. It's kind of surprising to see all these ones close to it, but I'm trying to decide if I'm underrating Ezra, but I just don't really think I am. Or maybe I'm overrating some of these ones, and they should be in C tier. I don't know. Let me know. That's why the tier list exists, huh? But let's move on to Cunning. And that moves us into my favorite leader, Trench. Admiral Trench. This guy, this little spider here, really has never done anything. I know there might have been a few times where the Vigilance Cunning version of him did well in a tournament or something, but realistically, this guy just doesn't have enough. Cunning villainy Vigilance isn't necessarily where you want to be. You really want to be at aggression Vigilance villainy, or if you're going to be the more controlling deck. And this one, while you do get some card filtering and ability to go ahead and get to that whatever card you're looking for, assuming you're discarding big cost things, you don't really want to be paying an action to try to draw a couple cards and getting a weak body later on in the game. It's just all not very great. There's nothing like truly terrible about him, but he's kind of a solidly in the bottom of C tier option. Can draw you a couple cards later on, but that's really it. Got a soft spot for this next one in Rio. Very first showcase I pulled happened to be a Rio. I think I have done one video on this guy as a result of that showcase being pulled. But interesting leader, the ability to go ahead and pump up and give your space unit saboteurs. Actually not bad, especially with the more sentinels out in the open these days. It does have like an interesting deploy with the ability to power it up with 5 toughness on 5 resources, which is kind of crazy. And if you do get it on a transport, it's +4, +5 in saboteur. It's just a lot of power. And that honestly can win you some games, just straight up. It's very similar to Major Vonreg in that way. They honestly have very similar styles, except I actually prefer Rio overall because that extra point of toughness and the saboteur can really help you push in damage. But it's very similar. I think overall, Vonreg plays a little bit better because he deploys a little bit earlier. I just prefer Rio as a deck. So we're going to put them pretty similar, just right behind each other in the B tier. Akbar is one of those leaders where there's always someone playing this guy, no matter what. Always someone's playing this guy. Little 1-cost action, exhaust an all-leader unit. If you do, they control an X-Wing token, 6 deploy, 3/8. There's nothing too powerful about him, really. You slowly ramp up your forces by spending a resource to create an X-Wing token. You don't really get in a lot of damage, and then at some point you turn the corner and you just start killing. And there are some decks that can't deal with that, and there are other decks that just really, really wreck you for this, really, really badly. It's never terrible. He does show up here and there every once in a while. People love bringing him to tournaments and being like, yeah, I won with Akbar. Cool. And, honestly, he's done pretty well so far. I definitely think he's worthy of kind of situating himself in the middle of B tier, but nothing too crazy going on with Akbar. Again, kind of just go wide. You do have Akbar unit in the deck now, which is definitely a stronger component of it, but there are just decks that do that a little bit better. And then if you're going to go and use Akbar, you're really trying to leverage his action. And even though the Akbar unit did give him a little bit of extra power, he never truly was very strong. It would always put him at the bottom of B tier or high C tier. So I think he's gotten a little bit better since then, but overall, kind of middle of the pack here. Speaking of other leaders that also use Akbar, we got Han Solo. This one's definitely been the Han Solo green variant, where you can deploy Akbar, get a bunch of units, and then maybe deploy Han and then play another Akbar. It's like high rolling there, but it's not too crazy with the Han JTL. You do get to reveal a top card, get +1/+0 with an action, assuming those are different odd cost cards on the top of your deck. This can help you potentially do some extra damage. There's the Neil combination with space units, allowing you to get instantly readied up space units. There is the piloting component of being able to ready a bunch of resources, and there can be explosive turns that happen. Overall, though, even though this has been a very, very popular leader, he has really, really been very poor in terms of performance. So a leader that a lot of people want to be playing because it is a very explosive and fun turn to have on 5 resources, but it's just not that great. I think that really comes down to there's a lot of other space decks that can interact with you very, very easily because you're usually playing bad units to work with your ability. and then your ability is not enough to close out the game immediately, and then you just end up losing. So, you know, really just not amazing, but not terrible. You know, it is a solid combination of cards. It's just, it doesn't really perform all that well typically. I think I gotta put him, don't think I can put him below Jin and Luthen, so I'll put him, you know, a little bit on the lower end of B tier here, just below Akbar and things. Honestly, Kazuda is kind of similar here. Another space-based deck. It's been interesting to see because I was kind of curious as to what we were seeing with Kazuda. And I've seen still a lot of Kazuda reds, still a lot of Kazuda greens. I've seen Akbar versions. This is one of those leaders, again, where because it's got a low sample size, it's hard to tell. This one, not as played as Han Solo, but also performing worse than Han Solo. Don't think you really have as many powerful things. You do have some really good synergies, like Fireball, of course, is really good in Kazuda. We've got cards like the Stolen AT Hauler that are still really good. The Trench Run, always very good. These types of cards, very good in Kazuda if you're going to go that direction. I think Space has gravitated towards Command. And honestly, the Command version of Kazuda is a lot less exciting than the Aggression version, typically in terms of utilizing his action. Doesn't mean it's less powerful. I do actually think the Kazuda Green tends to be more powerful because of Akbar. But overall, I don't think he really performs all that well. You have an early leader deploy, which is always good. You can just win games like that. It's very similar to like Von Reg and Silbobo in that way, where you just early leader can just win you some games. But I'm going to put him beneath some of the other options here. Definitely on the tier of like maybe Han Solo, but a little bit weaker. Next up, we've got Barriss. This was always one that I love playing around with because there are some combo potentials with her in Aggression specifically. Got an action to use the Force. You can play an event, making it cost one less. Not an extremely powerful payoff with Barriss. Typically, the best way to use resource advantage is to put proactive units into play to end the game. You don't want to be playing reactive events typically in Barriss or in situations where you can have resource discount. Now, does that mean you only play reactive events? No, but typically events tend to be reactive rather than proactive. So Barriss, not as powerful with the resource cost reduction, even though if this was units, I could definitely see this being a very powerful leader. 6 cost 4/7, also a little bit later on in the game. There's some cool things you can do, but overall, I don't think she stacks up quite all that well. Typically in Vigilance, because you are playing the Force deck, which means you're playing Tyrannus and Talzin's Assassin, and then you're like, okay, why are you playing Barriss over a lot of other leaders? Nothing terrible. Again, -1 resource on things can be powerful. It's just nothing to write home about. Next up, we got Grand Inquisitor. Now, this one, similarly to Barriss, we have a Force-based action on the front side. You use the Force, and you can attack with a friendly unit, giving another defender -2/-0. Honestly, even though I've never thought super highly of Grand Inquisitor, I actually think this action's a little bit better, considering how many Sentinels we've had in the format these days. So that's saying at least something, but he was like D tier, C tier before. And I still think he is along that line. 5 to deploy 3/5 with Shielded. I do like Shielded. You do have the action similarly on the flip side, getting some stuff -2/-0. But realistically, I mean, this action doesn't really progress the board. It's really reactive. It's only truly great against Sentinels. And then you get a 3/5 on flip. That's not exactly where you want to be. Overall, I don't think this Force payoff is very high. I actually think it's just pretty still weak. So I'm going to put him in C tier. Kind of at near the bottom here, because again, trying to like set up the Force and your payoff is to like shrink down your opponent's units when you attack them is pretty weak. We're on a string of leaders here with Cal Kestis, actually. Cal Kestis here, we've got an action, use the Force. An opponent chooses a ready unit they control, you exhaust that unit. So decent ability, honestly. I do like the fact that your opponent can choose the ready unit or has to choose the ready unit, so you can actually kind of control it a little bit. 4 to deploy 3/4 is just unacceptable. It is just unacceptable. I mean, you know, I'm not even a fan of like Sebulba's deploy where it's 3/5 or 2/5 with 1 raid 1, because that one can be a little bit tricky. With Cal, you don't even get like Saboteur or some interesting ability. You do get the on attack of exhausting things. This guy just does not have enough firepower, typically, is what it ends up being. I think that because it's a 4 deploy, I will put it a little bit higher in my judgment, but I do think he's kind of like a middle of the pack C tier maybe even D tier option. You could argue for that. The fact that it's a 3/4 is just way too weak. I mean, literally, this just dies to Imperial Armored Commando. Oof. And it lives. We've got another Legends of the Force leader with Qui-Gon Jinn. This has always been one of my favorite leaders to play. There's just so much value to be had with Qui-Gon. Action, use the Force, return a friendly unit from a non-leader unit to its owner's hand. You can play a non-villain unit that costs less than the return unit for free. So you basically bounce something very expensive. You can play something cheaper for free. You can kind of replay when play triggers and do some crazy things. Obviously, Yoda, Keller, and Beck, these cards are the best with it. That's kind of the ultimate goal. 6 deploy 4/7, not a bad stat line. This guy has actually been played quite a bit, and it has performed horribly. Absolutely horribly. You really can't be doing this like negative tempo game plan up against a lot of the decks these days, and it just ends up giving you so much trouble because your opponents are going to remove your units anyways, and if you're trying to like value them out with bouncing things, you're going to be in big trouble. So although, there's some excitement around Qui-Gon, I do think there's some cool things he's doing, I have to put him around the bottom of B tier. I would have put him a lot higher last set, but right now there's just too much tempo loss to try to work with Qui-Gon's ability. Next up, we've got Sly Moore. This one is a Cunning villainy. Got an action. If there are 4 or more exhausted units in play, you can pay 1 to create a spy token. Kind of interesting. Get a little bit of token advantage here, slowly but surely over the course of the game. I think this ability is pretty weak. Having the fact that you need to have 4 exhausted units on the board is a little bit tough. Keep in mind that if you play a unit, it's immediately exhausted, so you can trigger it that way. Generally, though, it's tough to have 4 or more exhausted units in play. And even if you do that, you get a spy token for 1 resource. Honestly, the strongest part about her is the 5 resource 3/6 to flip, but on attack, you can deal 2 damage to an exhausted unit. Now, that is actually a pretty powerful ability to have on an attack trigger. Other than that, you're really not getting a whole lot. The stat line's not that great. The action's not that great. Overall, I mean, it's kind of like a mediocre high value leader when you're attacking in. I don't think it's going to be higher than C tier, in my opinion. Next up, we got C3PO. This is just a D tier, guys. Do we need to explain any more? 1 cost action. If you control an exhaust unit to exhaust a unit, it costs 1. You have to have an exhaust unit, and then you can exhaust a unit. That's so expensive. And it's a 1/6. I thought we talked about 1/6s. These are just unacceptable. You can't have 1/6s in the game. I'm sorry, C3PO. D tier. Padme is up next, and this one has always been a little bit interesting. Where did I just put Padme? There you are. I just dropped them on my list. This list is getting large. But Padme, whenever you reveal or discard 1 or more cards from your hand, you can exhaust Padme to deal 1 damage. There isn't a whole lot of revealing or discarding that happens. Generally speaking, you do need to have the specific Secrets of Power cards that work with her. I think that's one of the biggest things that hold her back. If we had more cards that actually work with this ability, it's actually a very strong ability, as we've seen with like Cad Bane, right? If you're able to ping 1 damage every turn, I'm in. You can't really in this deck unless you have the setup for it. And then a 3/8 on flip for 6 is actually not bad either. And then there's no limitation for the ability on the flip side. Again, if there were a lot more ways to trigger this reliably and with good units, I would be happy for it. I don't think it's necessarily a bad leader at all. It was much better with Tarkentown in the format and taking over the early game. But overall, I think she's just kind of one of those leaders that gives you a little bit of value here and there, but overall doesn't really do anything outside of that. So we're going to put her nearing the bottom of B tier. Sabe is next up here. And this one's always been a little bit of a fun one, messing around with your opponent's hand and being able to basically mess around at the top of their library. Just going ahead and filtering for whatever you want. Nice 5 to deploy 3/6 with raid 1, so reasonably aggressive. And honestly, dealing with your opponent's hand, or hopefully dealing with some key cards in your opponent's hand, can be a very, very powerful ability or innate effect from Sabe. Messing around with the top of their deck doesn't really do a whole lot, to be honest. Yes, sometimes you get a key card. Most of the time, since they're drawing 2 cards anyways, you're going to be filtering into another card and you're not going to be able to see it. And it's not really going to matter. But definitely getting a key card maybe on like turn 5 or turn 6 after Sabe comes down, that can be relevant. Overall, I mean, she's kind of just an aggro leader that has a little bit of disruption with her as a leader on the front side, messing with their draws, and then with the actual taking cards from their hand, she has shown up a little bit and really not performed amazingly, but somewhat reasonable. Kind of, again, similar to like these other aggression slash cunning leaders that are all a little bit more aggro generically. This is in that ballpark. And I would say that she's up there with like the Padme Amidala and like the Luthens of the world. So gonna put her in that section of the B tier. We've got Lawless Time Jabba next up, and oh my goodness, is this one of the most fun leaders to completely demoralize your opponent. Is it strong though? Paying 1 to return a friendly underworld card to your, or underworld unit, I should say, to your hand, getting a credit token in the process. Realistically, not a whole lot. The best thing to do with this is like a Cad Bane, or not a Cad Bane, a Garinden up against, decks that are a little bit more mid-range / late game focused, where you're just picking apart their hand. You play Garinden turn 1, you take a card, hopefully you're lucky, right? Hopefully you're lucky and you pick something that's in their deck. Generally speaking, if you're fighting the meta decks, it's not super out of the ordinary to actually hit something with it. Then the next turn, you bounce it, play Garinden again, take a second thing. Next turn, you bounce it, play Garinden again, take a third thing. Usually it doesn't go as smoothly as this because your opponent's playing units on the way and you're doing nothing but just discarding cards from their hand. And that usually sets you up for a pretty rough game. So overall, pretty bad strategy, I would say. Like, you really don't want to be completely destroying your tempo every single turn, and that's exactly what Jabba does. I would say that in general, this is a strategy that really, really requires a very, very good matchup for this to work. And I mean, like, your opponent basically has 0 units and they are like full on control. Like Mandalorian, for example, this can actually do some work where, okay, maybe they are going to try to draw cards and I'm just going to pick apart their hand every single turn. Maybe you can do something with that. But even then, Mandalorian is drawing so many cards that oftentimes it doesn't even matter that you're discarding cards from their hand, and then they're just going to outvalue you. So I don't even think that's necessarily something that you want to be using Jabba against. He's going to be a bottom of C tier, really, really mediocre leader. Talk about a leader that's completely dropped off the face of the earth, the Client. This was a super popular leader last set, especially in the aggression category where your opponents were just dropping like battle furies on their clients and hitting you for 7 as a 7/7 shielded unit. I would say certainly the fact that it's a 4/4 shielded leader on 5 is a big hindrance now because its shield just gets removed by an action from yours truly. That's right, Cad Bane. And that means that it has a horrendous matchup up against Cad Bane. You no longer can just put a battle fury on the client and kind of sit behind it and rely on that shield token to protect it. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And even 7 toughness afterwards, if you truly try to go for a full upgrade strategy, it's not really going to work all that well for you. Then the fact that you are able to exhaust some units don't really matter as much because they've got Sentinels to block this big, huge unit strategy that you're going for, or even just playing a more aggressive strategy like BT1 into 000 into just hitting your opponent's face. This whole game plan just does not work nearly as well. I mean, honestly, before he was performing at like an A tier level. I think now he's actually just C tier. Like, I just think the game plan that you're running with the Client has basically no chance in the larger scheme of the format right now. Like, that exact game plan that we were seeing perform well is no longer an option. And that is just, well, the reason why we don't see the Client at all. Like I said, he was extremely popular last set, and I have not seen any remnant of this guy in the most recent tournaments. Next up, we've got Han Solo, the one that is able to defeat some friendly tokens for 1 damage to a unit. It is so funny. Every single time I see like Han or Vader, I just think of that meme where it's like, look what they have to do to mimic a fraction of our power. Yeah, this is the same case for all those other cards. It is just way too much setup for the payoff to be just a Cad Bane trigger. Yes, you can hit 1 toughness units, I suppose, but really that's not super relevant. 5 resource 4/5 does have some a decent flip with that, and also you are able to like maybe play a force deck to constantly defeat your friendly force token. It does have Saboteur, which is nice against the Sentinels, but it is a 4/5, which means it dies extremely easy. Extremely easy. I don't think the overall game of trying to play like a Cunning Vigilance force deck and only utilizing the Force deal 1 damage to things every turn is a viable strategy. Like, you're putting bad cards in your deck, well, not bad cards necessarily, but a weaker strategy in your deck to try to enable something that's relatively just okay in the grand scheme of things, because you don't have other cards that synergize with the 1 damage trigger, because you have to play all the other cards that synergize with the fact that you have to generate the token to do the 1 damage trigger. So lots of setup for a payoff that, while it is potentially strong, you don't have the synergy for that ping to be really, really powerful. Like, the reason why Cad Bane's so strong is there's no setup. You just do it, and then you can play all the cards that work with it. That's not the case for Han Solo. I have seen this guy show up like once or twice, and he has performed incredibly bad every single time. He is like a very, very weak option here in the format. Yes, you can get rid of shield tokens, and that can be relevant in certain circumstances, but overall, just a weak option. Next up, talk about another leader that was really popular last set. Fell off a lot, and yet I think that's just because he's been underrated, not necessarily because he's bad of a leader. I think this guy's actually an S tier option. He's an S tier option. Don't think he's quite as strong as Luke, and we're still cracking the code on this guy. I've played quite a few different Lando versions now, and for some reason, when I was playing him, I was like, oh yeah, you could just use this action on your opponent if you are playing those control decks. I think a couple of you in the comment section mentioned it when I was playing the Lando deck initially, because I played a different version that a lot of other people were running. I've seen some like 60 card, 70 card versions of Lando out there, and you're just like playing a just full on control deck, and you're just sitting and waiting for your opponent to lose, really. And it works really well, because turns out, similar to Cunning, if you just get a bunch of resources and then use your big powerful events or units or whatever it is to maintain parity on the board after that point, you're then going to have the deck that has all the big stuff in it, and your opponents are not, and you're just going to win. So overall, has been performing very, very excellently. Again, not nearly as popular as he once was. In this top 10 still, but we're talking like played on the level of like Aura Singh. That's how infrequent. But his win rate's actually really up there comparatively. It's above cards like Ahsoka and Darth Vader and Piet, but below Luke Skywalker and Krennic in terms of performance. Overall, this guy has been really, really strong. And there's, again, different variants. I've seen the more hard control, huge deck size. I've seen the more consistent, all vigilant, or all can name just vigilance, and then you're going to get the trigger from Lando. But still, both of those versions are using Pre-Vizsla and Chimera to win the game. I've seen a more like heroism unit-based strategy that also is pretty good. I've found that you can go a couple different directions when you just have extra resources, and that's what Lando does. He's pretty strong, and I do think that he is going to stick around and be one of those leaders that if, let's say, Cad Bane is banned, Lando's still going to be a really strong one, because no matter what your opponents are doing, turns out just having the versatility to be able to spend one resource to essentially save that resource for the future is really, really good. Next up, we've got Emperor Palpatine, one of the starter deck leaders alongside Luke Skywalker. This guy, able to choose an exhausted friendly unit to give an advantage token for each other friendly unit. Very, very action intensive, right? You have to attack with a unit, then use your action, then you get an advantage token based on the other units you have. Oftentimes, this is just 1 or 2. Typically, you deploy pretty late into the game, and you get to go ahead and do the same thing on the flip side with the attack trigger. So you really don't get a huge payoff. Like, you have to go wide, and, villainy Cunning is not really the place to be. You kind of want to be in heroism and command specifically. He's a 4/8 for 7, which isn't the worst. It's not great, though. Overall, I just don't see the reason why you would play this guy. I really don't. I've seen people try, and he has performed terribly, like absolutely miserable. I think trying to build like a go wide strategy with Palpatine and doing, again, this is what the leaders are for, right? Trying to play a strategy that actually works with Emperor Palpatine just makes your deck worse. I think this guy's just absolute. I thought he was just E tier. I'm putting him back in this row right here. I think this guy's just straight up D tier. I do not think you should be trying to do what Palpatine wants to do. You can play just like, oh, I'm going to play a normal curve out deck, and then occasionally I'm going to get an advantage token somewhere. Yeah, there's just so many other better leaders to do that with. So I think actually trying to build towards this game plan, which is what the D tier is for, generally makes your win rate worse. And that's what we've seen with Palpatine. He has just been pretty mediocre. I'm curious to see if anyone's actually had any true success with him going for the strategy of what Palpatine wants to do. Overall, I mean, just one advantage token as the payoff doesn't feel very good. Shin, on the other hand, which is another new leader, I've been actually quite impressed with. We've got another Cunning villainy. When a friendly unit's attack ends, you can exhaust this leader. If you do, exhaust a unit that costs less than the damage dealt to a base for this attack. Basically, if you have a 3-power turn 1 unit, you can exhaust a 2 cost or less, and then so on and so forth. Now, there's a lot of units that you could use this to set up, right? Like, typically, Cunning Aggression is the game plan. You can play, like, Strike Ship or Warrior of Clan Order on turn 1, so you can exhaust their 2-drop. Turn 2, you can play, like, Shin, for example, which is a 4-powered unit, which allows you to go ahead and exhaust their 3-drop. Typically, if you're playing a racing strategy or you're playing a unit-based strategy that's not just purely Sentinels, you could really mess up your opponents. That said, the best decks typically are decks that don't really care about this from Shin. Really, like, sure, you can exhaust my units. I'm not really trying to use my units to interact with you in any way. Especially if you look at, like, Krennic or Cad Bane or even Lando. Ahsoka, you're just going to end up, like, immediately attacking him with stuff, so it's not going to be relevant. Even, like, Darth Vader, that's one of the matchups where, you know, maybe if you get a lucky hit in and you can go ahead and exhaust one of their units, they usually have multiple, to prevent them from creating tokens, maybe, but it's not terrible. It's not terrible, and I actually do think that the tempo game plan can be very, very strong. So overall, I mean, she's on the higher end, to be honest. She's on the higher end. I would put her up here with, like, some of these other aggro options. I think she's actually been a high B tier option, especially against certain lists that are using their units as ways to interact with your opponent. Next up, we got Grief Karga, and I talked about Ezra earlier and how this is basically just a weaker version of Grief Karga. I still believe that. Now, is Grief Karga doing absolute work? Not necessarily. He is significantly better performing than Ezra with a very, very similar list, and Grief is much more popular. They're basically just pure aggression, cunning, heroism, aggro leaders with utilizing some of the best cards like Yellow Ace's Bomber or Pegasus Tri-Wing and things like that. Because they both generate advantage tokens, they both kind of do want to do the same thing. The difference is with Ezra, you have to have another friendly unit, and then you have to attack with your units. You have to play a sequence that's really awkward, whereas Grief just gives you it immediately. So it works much better with ambushers. It works much better with just cards being played, like Yellow Ace's Bomber. Just immediately works with a prior card. Pegasus Tri-Wing is individually just a stronger card. It comes down immediately ready no matter what, assuming you haven't exhausted Grief, I suppose. He's shown up quite a bit and actually has a okay win rate for being a strategy that's not one of the main strategies in the format right now. It's kind of hard to judge some of the most popular decks because they're the ones coming up against the most, like, dominant decks most often. And so that could be a little bit tricky. I don't think he is like a bad or incredibly amazing leader. I definitely think he is the strongest aggro leader that we have. Like, if you look at some of the other options here, I think he fits himself right kind of in this A tier portion, right behind Mandalorian. This is your de facto aggro leader. You might consider Ahsoka or Luke as aggro. I don't really consider them as an aggro deck. You know, Grief is all about, I play units every single point along the curve, and I kind of just get in damage. Ahsoka's more about this combo finish, and Luke Skywalker is more about, you know, maintaining value on the board and then eventually using your Luke pilot to close out the game and make it so your opponent can't really interact with you. But they're adjacent. Grief Karga is much more of the aggressive strain. So definitely, if you're looking for an aggro leader to play, Grief is very good and can win you some games, certainly. And lastly, in Cunning, we've got Grogu. This is an interesting leader. Probably the most interesting leader we have in the entire game right now. Outside of maybe if you want to talk about like Chewbacca or whatnot. But very weird where it has no ability. It says when you play a unique unit that costs 4 or more, you can deploy him. And when you do, he's a 0/3. Oh, I talked about Satine earlier. And yeah, similar thought process here. Now, he does give an effect, which is when another friendly unit is defending, it gets +1/+0. And when another friendly unit is attacking, the defending unit gets -1/-0. Now, important to note that doesn't count for itself. Right? So you can't ever get any value with the exception of Grogu just sitting out and bumping up the other units. I think the biggest thing with Grogu is that people just oftentimes try to kill Grogu on repeat. And it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to do so because he just comes back the next turn. You have a million unique units in the deck. It's just going to come back every single turn. And he's kind of annoying that way. But the effect is actually not that good, right? Usually, if you're defending, you kind of want to have -1/-0, not +1/+0. And if you're attacking, you kind of want +1/+0, not -1/-0, typically, right? We've seen this with like Chirrut, for example, or even the Lando Sentinels. If you're trying to protect Grogu, you're going to have some Sentinels, and having that extra tankiness backing up can actually be pretty powerful. Now, I will say, it does work reasonably well with some other cards out there, like Caloran Beck is a great addition in Grogu. There are some specifically strong cards that work extremely well with Grogu. I think Caloran Beck, like I said, is the best because 4-resource, unique deploy, it attacks, it ambushes, and then immediately gives something -1/-0, and it gets +1 power because Grogu's a 0-powered unit. There are some cool things you can do with Grogu, minor synergies. I've seen some posts about Grogu like, we made it in the Galactic Championship. It didn't perform very well, and a lot of people tried him out. It was one of those leaders where, it had actually like 7 or 8 different showings for it across some of the tournaments that we've seen. And yet, even in those cases, it wasn't like, when you look at like one deck or one game played or 2 games played, you're like, oh, I guess they have a 0% win rate. It's probably just like an 0-3 and then they dropped or whatever. So be it. But then when you have like 7 or 8 people playing and your win rate starts to become like 25 to 30%, you're like, ooh, maybe this is really not what we want to be doing. And that's exactly what I think with Grogu. I think he has some cool dynamics to him, okay? I'm going to put him above Satine, but that's as far as I will go. I do think that he is not a very powerful leader. And I think a lot of people just don't know how to play around him. And it makes it like their game more hard to play, even though it's still probably winning for them. So interesting one to think about and a very unique one, but something that, maybe you should give a shot. It's fun to play. But that moves us into the realm of multi-aspect and hero and villainy cards here, which we've got quite a few of them now, actually. We've got a total of 7 of them. And we just start off with the Armorer. So the Armorer is another upgrade leader. One that allows you to kind of bypass one of the biggest downsides with upgrade decks, which is you're able to play an upgrade from your resources on a unit that entered play, and you can resource the top card of your deck. Now, you still have to pay resources of that card, but the idea here is now you don't have to keep your upgrades in hand and keep your units in hand and then have them both at the right time. You just resource your upgrades, and then you can play your units, and then if it works out, you can put those upgrades on the units. We have gotten some really powerful upgrades, like the Darksaber is one of the best. And then the flip side is a 5-resource 4/6 that just allows you to play upgrades from your discard pile on a unit here. This is a very strong ability. I think this is the thing that catches people off guard. If you don't deal with armor, it actually can kind of run away with the game a little bit. And you'd be surprised. We've actually had a big showing, similarly to like the amount of decks of Obi-Wan out there. And she's actually performed better than like all of those ones, which is incredible for an upgrade-based leader. And there are some meme strategies, right? Like you could be playing the weird little Camtono list, or you could be playing like the improvised negotiation list, or whatever else that you could be finding out in the world. But realistically, I think the best list is just kind of typically just playing out solid upgrades and then beating down with the armor. I don't think I could put her in A tier, because there is like a really easy way to defeat her. And a lot of people just aren't building for her at the current moment. But I actually think she is borderline A tier in terms of strength and power. Obviously, don't play the stupid Camtono list and don't do the stupid stuff, right? It's very fun to do, but don't do it. And then you're probably going to win some games. You're probably just going to win some games because in some cases, your opponents will just not be able to answer what you're doing, which is pretty cool. We get to follow that up with an absolute stinker. Anakin Skywalker. If this card said that you could play villainy units from your hand, this might actually be a game plan, right? We can use the Force to basically cheat on villainy aspects for events. And basically what that means is like no glory, only results is a playable card. You can play some upgrades as well. Basically, you kind of play Anakin Blue purely because of the Anakin card, because you're going to have villainy cards in your discard pile, and that's the best synergy you have. You don't have any other aspect to back you up, but this matters less because you can splash a little bit with the villainy cards. there's just not enough villainy cards to make this worthwhile. No Glory is a great payoff, right? I do like that one. But outside of that, there's nothing else really that I'm super excited about. Super excited about. I don't really think you should be playing this guy. I don't think the payoff is super high. You could just play forced cards, though. It's not like too worrying because there's a lot of them now. And so even if you're just playing the heroism, vigilance aspects, you're not going to be too shafted. You do have cards like Secretive Sage, for example, on turn 1, amongst others, that could really put, like Yaddle, put force in your possession. I don't think this guy is very good at all. I don't think he's very good at all, though. And you can get some value out of a 5 resource 4/6 deploy. But overall, he's kind of similar to the Agent Callus for me, in that you kind of have this weird leader where in very, very rare cases, you could see a little bit of the power shining through for them. But then if you're building the whole deck around them, you're just not going to see the power be all that strong most of the time. So we'll put him in the middle to bottom portion of C. I will always respect all of the players that try to bring Revan and completely get dominated every single Galactic Championship. I mean, this guy has been played actually a few more times than a lot of the people even in B tier in terms of performance, or mount played at least. But he has performed one of the worst on the entire list. And it's no surprise. I love Darth Revan. I think he is the coolest character. And I love trying to make Always 2 with him work and all the other stuff. But the deck or the game is no longer about trying to defeat value trading your opponent's units. If you're trying to do that, you're not winning. Cad Bane is just going to put that to the test. In a lot of cases, a lot of the best decks are space-based decks. You can't even really do it because you don't want to be playing space-based deck in Revan. That's just not really what's going to work super well with the cards that you've got dealt to you. I think this guy is an actual D tier. I do not think you should be playing this guy at all. In fact, I think he is one of the worst leaders in the game, unfortunately. I really wish he was better. And that isn't even going to say, we're only playing with one aspect, which is even worse. Next up, we got Tobias Beckett. This one, Cunning Vigilance. Get to go in and donate some units to your opponent and then flip him and then hopefully do some cool things with aggressive negotiations. I've seen this guy absolutely pop off still. There is still that combo finish-esque. I think a lot of people really struggle to play against this guy. It's pretty skill intensive and play as Tobias. Both of those things are pretty skill intensive. Overall, I mean, he does one thing and one thing alone, which is really utilize some very, very powerful, solid, cunning aggression cards to good effect. And in some cases, your opponents just can't really deal with that. In other cases, you'll be put a Sentinel at the right time, and you're going to be really sad. I've seen decks gravitate more towards specific upgrades that power up Tobias, because Tobias is a nice one to be building around, right? It's like putting Ascension Cable on Tobias, and then that opens you up for aggressive negotiations at any point into the base, which is a great finishing opportunity for you. Overall, I mean, you can drop like a Chrysanthemum and get some huge damage in, certainly, but the strategy is honestly performing pretty solidly, and overall Tobias is not really slacked a whole lot. It has a few games under its belt. It has a pretty solid win rate for having those few games under its belt. I've got to put this guy at the top of B tier. I've got to put him up here. I realistically think that he's just been pretty strong. So in terms of what we've seen so far, not like the deck overall, but I think in terms of, okay, performance from him and what the strategy is, I think there are workarounds, and everyone loves a good combo finish, right? I've played against this guy so much in Eternal lately, but we'll put him near the top of B tier here. On another note, Saw Gerrera, another dual aspect in command aggression here. Attacking with units, getting +2/+0, but you are defeating that unit afterwards. I think this sort of strategy is a lot weaker when there are chimeras running around. The whole idea of getting temporary bursts of power in order for you to get in some extra damage really gets way weaker when your opponent can reliably heal up every single game. Because that just means that as soon as they get to that point, you have ran out of steam and you no longer can win the game. I will say powering up your units allows you to have an easy access way to maybe punch through some Sentinels where otherwise you would just lose the unit, which is kind of nice. In other ways, maybe your action literally does nothing because you've got a 2/4 and they've got a 2/6. And you're like, I could use this action, but I deal 4 damage. My unit still dies. That's not super great. So you may as well make them attack your unit to use an action, for example. There are weird situations like that, and I don't even want to say weird because it's pretty common. Like you could even play like your partisan, I forgot the name, but the command aggression card that dies and gives you -1 cost next turn. And then you're like, oh, I can attack into a Marok and do something cool. No, you're probably not going to be able to do anything cool. You're just going to get stonewalled by an Imperial Armored Commando and the Marok still on the board. You know, that's just going to be pretty common. I don't think this is a very viable strategy right now. It could do some cool things, but I've got to put him in the like middle part of the C tier here. Next up, we got Fennec Shand. I know you all know what I think of Fennec. We got an aggression cunning card. 1 cost action to exhaust a friendly unit. You can play something from your hand, entering play ready. So you basically get to exchange whatever that attack your unit could do for a future attack from another unit that you have in your hand. 4 to deploy 3/4 with Saboteur, probably the best thing going for her. I don't think this action's good at all. Oftentimes, it is just going to be completely blanked because you are basically just paying 1 resource to do the exact same amount of damage as another unit would have been able to do. Like, yes, suppose if you keep your units on the board for enough time, eventually you can exhaust like a 2-cost unit, and then you can play a 3-cost unit, and you're like, boom, I get extra damage. Or maybe you played a couple 1-cost units, and then you exhaust one of those and play a 3-cost unit with your 4 resources, and you're like, boom, I get a ready-to 3-resource play. Even in those scenarios, like if you just think about some of the strongest 3-cost plays, like let's say 000. Let's say you're playing Storm Raider and 000. Storm Raider is a 2/2 raid 1. I think that's the name of it. You get in for 3. 000, assuming you have the card, gets in for 5. So you basically paid 1 resource to get in for 2 extra damage, but with a weird sequence of actions that doesn't allow you to immediately utilize that. This is a very, very bad strategy. You really don't want to be doing that. A 4 resource 3/4 also just gets absolutely annihilated by so many things. You really can't play a bunch of 1-drops that are just bad anymore because of the Sentinels being so prolific. If there wasn't as many good Sentinels, then you could potentially just take the loss on a couple of attacks in with units and then just get in for some more damage. But with Sentinels being able to just block all of them, you kind of end up trading your like Fennec Shand off for their Imperial Armored Commando, and you're like, that doesn't feel like a great trade, to be honest. Like, I don't really want to be doing that, but I'm kind of forced to. Yeah, I've not had a good experience with Fennec. I'm not going to put her in D tier because I do think there are some fun things like Urk being readied up and being a hidden unit can be good. Outcast on turn 1 basically allows you to, you know, okay, let's say that was a 2-powered space unit. Now you're passing that 1 power along, and that can give you a little bit more damage and make Fennec a 4/4 and things like that. Maybe if you put down something that has a relevant on attack trigger, that can do some work, but overall just kind of weak. I'll keep her in the C tier compartment here. I'm not putting in D tier, guys. You should be proud of me. And lastly, we've got DJ. This is a double cunning with an action. Choose a friendly unit. If you do, play a unit from your hand, costing 1 less. And then, well, that unit captures it when it comes into play. So the friendly unit gets captured, or the friendly unit captures your friendly unit, but you do get the when played triggers. A 6 to deploy 4/6, and then any captured unit that gets freed basically enters ready. Idea here is that you put a bunch of units underneath another unit, you deploy DJ, you get this big combo turn, you flip, boom, you just get in for a bunch of damage. What usually happens is you try to put things under that unit, right? And maybe you get some valuable when play triggers, oftentimes not, right? Oftentimes not. And then with all that, you just end up losing because you're not actually putting presence on the board, and the when play triggers don't do enough. Right? So you are playing these random when played triggers. Cool. I do nothing, and then I no longer have a unit on board. And sure, maybe your opponent will have to deal with your other unit. Probably not, because you don't have other units dealing damage to them. So they don't feel the pressure. And then they can just stall. And then they maybe just put up a Sentinel and then maybe kill that unit when it's relevant for them. And then deal with all your other units before DJ comes down, because they all come in exhausted at that point. And then you don't utilize DJ because it's late to deploy. It's a 4/6. Everything here about DJ just feels bad. And to top it all off, he's double cunning. And there has been almost no support for double aspect leaders. Dual aspect leaders are interesting because you can play at least multiple different aspects, right? You have 3 total aspects. Like Saw has command, aggression, and then cunning or vigilance. And same thing to go with like Fennec or these other decks. But DJ has still two aspects because really there's no support for double Cunning right now. Back in set 1, there was actually quite a few cards like Cunning in of itself and the Cantina Bouncer and cards like that, and you actually could set up something with DJ that actually made sense. Now, there's just nothing. Like, why would you ever be playing DJ? I think this guy is a D tier option. Really, just trying to play this guy and doing like the weird things that DJ does. Yeah, you really don't want to be doing whatever DJ does, honestly. Honestly. And that brings us to the end here. Zooming out to get a little bit better of a view. We've got a large B tier and a large C tier. And honestly, this is what I view of the meta. Like, you have a clear dominant winner. You've got a bunch of decks that are extremely competitive that actually can win games and win tournaments. You have a good selection of options down beneath that actually can compete. But the majority of decks are getting pushed out because of the dominance of a select few. And that leads to a larger B and a larger C tier. In the past, I think A tier was more expansive, but I do think there is a clear, noticeable difference between CAD and the S tier. Maybe Krennic is an argument to put up in the CAD tier. And then there's a clear difference between like the S's and some of the A tiers, right? Maybe not Daedra compared to the rest of them, but like Grief Karga and Leia and JTL Thrawn and these types of lists versus Ahsoka and Luke and Krennic. There is a clear indicator that those are much weaker. And then when you start talking about the B tiers, you're already thinking about like fringe playables, right? Like Armor, people are like think it's a joke. And like Kylo, you're like, is that even a leader? Or like Obi-Wan? Isn't that like dead now? Like, so when you start to look at some of these leaders in B tier, like, oh yeah, these are just things that have kind of dropped off the list. Maybe they're played a little bit, but they just perform really poorly. And of course, C and D tier. Yeah, I mean, you're going to struggle. Overall, I think this is kind of just what the list ends up being. If you look at kind of the performance of the deck and, you know, compare it against playability and popularity, there are definitely some arguments to be made because, you know, some of these lists higher up on the list may have lower win rates, but higher popularity. And that does mean that they have a higher chance of going up against the more prominent decks at a more common rate. And yes, some of these lists at the lower amounts played, they just have some weird matchups and they never fought Cad Bane, and so their win rate's a little bit better than other decks, etc. And these are all balancing factors. And of course, tier lists at the end of the day are also opinion based, right? So even though we do have some stats and some data, at the end of the day, it is a person rating it, which is why I always love these videos, because everyone gets their opinion in and it's always a battle. But I think overall, the meta is looking a little bit top heavy from what we've seen in the previous iterations. Like if you go back a couple sets, and the fact that we have more leaders and yet the top end seems more heavy versus, or I should say like more dominant, which leads to it having less options, is saying something. Which means, is Cad Bane ban a necessary thing? Probably. Is Chimera and Pre-Vizsla a necessary ban? Potentially. And the conversation goes on and on and on. I'm sure we'll have more videos about that in the future. We'll see if they do anything about it. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below and how you rate all these leaders. Is there really truly a clear difference between Cad and the rest of the crew? Or is this just a popularity contest? Let me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.